The LA County Department of Arts and Culture recognizes and acknowledges the first people of this ancestral and unceded territory. We are honored to be joined by Rudy Ortega, tribal member and tribal president of the Fernandino Tatavian Band of Mission Indians, the people facing the sun, the historic tribe of North Los Angeles County, the ancestral villages of San Fernando, Santa Clarita, Eastern Simi, and Antelope Valleys. Thank you, Rudy, for leading us in prayer to honor First People, villages, First Nations, and traditional territories.
Hami's not. Tamira I, Netawan Rudy Ortega Jr. Hello, it's a good day to be here, and I'm happy to be part of this. And my name is Rudy Ortega Jr. I want to, in everyone's own way, ask for goodness and prayer, how you pray to the Creator, how you pray, or how you give thanks to your neighbor, or ask for healing and medicine, especially now in this time of our pandemic, as we move to strengthen our communities and bring awareness. I want to sing this song. It's in our ancestral language. It's shared with the Gabalino people as well as the Pipi Matam language. The song is asking that we open up and welcome our people into our village. So the words is Paco, which is enter, and Gima means come. So I'm saying come and enter into our place, into our homes here. So this is, I find it's fitting for our events as we open up these conversations and these talks and this type of fashion to welcome everybody respectfully. So with that, and again, pray in your own way. Paco kema, Paco kema, Paco kema, me kema, me kema, Paco kema, Paco kema, Paco kema, me kema, me kema, Paco kema, Paco kema, Paco kema, me kema, me kema, Paco kema, Paco kema, Paco kema, me kema, me kema. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rudy, for being here and for your beautiful welcome song and opening for today's event. We really appreciate your presence. I'll start getting into some of the logistics for today. Our agenda has been shared in the chat. Please use the chat to introduce yourself, your organizational affiliation, if you're affiliated with an organization, and use the link in the chat to acknowledge the ancestral land you are calling or zooming in from. A few housekeeping items to share. Please visit the event webpage. The link is in the chat as well to review all the items that will be shared today. They're also detailed on the slides before you. This event will be closed captioned. Please use the closed captioning button located on the toolbar of Zoom to choose between subtitles and a minute-by-minute closed captioning breakdown. The event will also be recorded. So if you do not want to be recorded, kindly turn off your video. When presenters are speaking, we also ask that you turn your video off, but welcome you to use the chat to engage with presenters, to offer questions, and to engage with one another. Please make sure to name yourself in your face rectangle. So we want to see your first name and name of your organization, if that's applicable, by clicking on the 3 dots in the top right-hand corner of your video pane and clicking rename. The Department of Arts and Culture has established the following community agreements for today's convening. You can see the slide in front of you. If there are any others you would like to add, please add a message to the chat now, and more can be added later. If there's nothing to add, we'll take a moment of silence as a demonstration of our consent to these agreements. Okay, thank you. We ask that you please remain muted for the duration of the presentations. Again, use the chat to share your questions for each presenter. Staff will track the questions in the chat and call on you or read them aloud for our presenters during the Q&A portion of the agenda, whatever you prefer. If time permits, we will open the presentation space for questions and answers after each presentation. Any questions not responded to will be responded to after today on the event webpage or addressed at a future convening in a workshop or communication. For the event, we recommend it's best to keep your Zoom on speaker view. That concludes logistics for today. And now to get into the program, I'd like to welcome Kristen Sakota, the director of the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. And thank you, Rudy, as well, for opening us up with that land acknowledgement and that share. So again, I'm Kristen Sakota, Director of your Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture. I am wearing a purple dress, and I'm a proud African-American woman with glasses and a big smile on my face and long red auburn colored locks. So I want to say that we're so excited today to support the role of art and artists in advocacy, activism, social justice, and reimagination, and to partner with the National Art for Justice Fund on this day of engagement with the Los Angeles arts field. Our work with them today supports not only this event, but provides each of these amazing leaders that you're going to hear from a grant to further their work. We know that these Activating Art and Advocacy Initiative grants will inspire further collaboration across, within, and beyond the Art for Justice network of grantees, artists, and organizations, all working to disrupt the criminal justice system in positive ways with art and advocacy. The Art for Justice Fund is a sponsored project of the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. And I'm proud to say the Department of Arts and Culture is a member of the Art for Justice Network for our work repurposing Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act dollars to reimagine public safety through investments in arts education and programs that invest in the creative voice of justice impacted youth and communities. On the Art for Justice Fund and their colleagues at the Ford Foundation, who are instrumental in that work, I'm excited to say that we're joined today by Margaret Morton. She is the Director of Creativity and Free Expression at the Ford Foundation and is here on behalf of Ford and the Art for Justice Fund. And I hope it's going to say a few words. There she is. Hi, Margaret.
Hello, Kristen. Hello, LA. I thank you for having me. I am on the unceded land of Lenape people in the Bronx, New York. I'm a brown-skinned African-American woman wearing a flowered dress with some art behind me. And I'm just delighted to be here. I answered a she, her, hers. I hold today's program really close to my heart. I had the opportunity to be a public servant for many years in New York City, serving New York City's arts community, and had an opportunity to do a similar program like today's program with Kristen in the wake of the 2016 election of the former president who shall not be named. And at which time we really needed it. It helped to galvanize and center us. I also welcomed an opportunity to always strengthen the rights of artists, and we need them more than ever. We need you more than ever right now. At the Ford Foundation, I support the Ford's creativity work. We address inequality by really holding up narratives that challenge white supremacy and the systems it has wrought. We support films, documentary films with social justice themes, and we support art and stories about or told by Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, as well as disabled people. I also have the privilege, as Kristen noted, of being part of the Art for Justice Fund, which was established 4 years ago now, I can't believe it, through Agnes Gunn's bravery and generosity. The fund is led by Agnes and her daughter, Catherine, as well as my Ford colleagues, Helena Huang and Tanya Koch. Art for Justice partners with artists and policy advocates, which I think really reflects who you are in this room today. Ideally working together to make cultural and legal change. Some recent things to note were the work to restore Pell Grants, for example, that Art for Justice helped support for students who are incarcerated, which was a important win. And of course, the miraculous Florida Rights Restoration Coalition headed by Desmond Meade, which worked to restore the right to vote to 1.4 million Floridians who were previously incarcerated, is really an amazing historic feat for Florida, but really for this country. Finally, Civil Rights Corps, which moved to abolish cash bail systems, other post-conviction fines and fees, collection practices in places like St. Louis, New Orleans, and Houston. In addition, we support Art for Justice supports artists who are doing work in this space, in addition to arts organizations and the Department of Arts and Culture. I'm delighted to know that in the House today are Art for Justice partners, Patrice Cullors and Luis Rodriguez. At a time when the power of your work is more urgent than ever, the forces of disinformation, have really transformed the landscape of our country. White supremacy and organizing, it has really, it's thriving. Extremist thinking is thriving. And this polarization, which is growing because local journalism has been really reduced and eliminated in many ways. And people are looking to the internet and for national information from national media platforms, which really drives this idea of what is false and what is real. Artists, writers are more important than ever. Your work is more important than ever. This condition really requires rethinking and old forms of communication. We need movement journalism. We need artists to work in community, in the public realm, to counter things like old monuments. We need artists in the virtual space. We need new narratives. Children need to see images. They need to see narratives that form their ideas about who they are and what's valued. And they need to see more Amanda Gormans. I will just briefly say that California, from LA to the Bay Area, has really been, for us, kind of led the country in partnerships and collaboration between criminal justice and artists, more so than New York ever could. And we have watched you, artists like Patrice and Luis, and arts, theater, and writing organizations have really impacted and served in institutions before it was done anywhere else. And in community, we follow you, we're grateful for you. When we value the unprecedented work that Kristen and Denise are doing at the department, thanks to Kristen's leadership, she's divided an integrative approach to really bringing agencies together to solve the problems that youth face in community in a humane way rather than a carceral way. And again, we are watching you on that, and we thank you for that leadership. Finally, I offer my condolences to your communities who have been so devastated by this crisis. We in New York hear you and feel you, and reach out to you in spirit. We are pleased to see that artists have been empowered and arts organizations have been empowered in this way. That continues, and I thank you for your work.
Amazing, thank you. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing, Margaret, everything that the Ford Foundation is doing, everything Art for Justice is doing, and the ways that you are really shifting what's possible in philanthropy, and the way that you're thinking about the role of the arts, and the way that you're thinking about the role of trust and naming white supremacy, and just everything that you're doing and all of your investments. They're critical. And I so appreciate you also lifting up LA and LA's role in this. That's been not new, but continues to grow and continues to push us forward. I love that as a lot of people know, I'm a performing artist by trade and by training, also was an attorney by trade and by training. But so I like being in the space, physically feeling the room. We can't do that right now in the virtual space, but what we can do is hear from colleagues like Margaret Morton and Ford Foundation that we maybe wouldn't have been able to otherwise, because we can create a moment and we can hold space across the digital time and divide. So thank you so much. I want to also just take a minute to acknowledge the LA County Board of Supervisors and their arts deputies who work in their offices, as well as for our department, our appointed arts commissioners, some of whom are with us today and joining us. Their support and advocacy makes everything possible, as well as our incredible staff at the Department of Arts and Culture. Huge shout out for our Grants and Professional Development Director, Angie Gaspar Milanovic, and Senior Grants Manager, Laura Guerrero Nieto, Director of Communications, Kristen Frederick, Cross-Sector Manager, Kim Glenn, and Communications Associate, John Johnson. They made today possible. Thank you also to Heather Rigby and our full staff, many of whom are here. I also just want to acknowledge, again, we're on a virtual platform, but I can see so many friends, colleagues, and grantees who are here working with us today with our LA cultural community. Everyone from, I think Danielle Brazel of the great city of LA is on, folks from the Hammer, LACMA, Philanthropy, Dance Resource Center. So we see you, and thank you again for being with us today as we have this conversation. So, our mission at the LA County Department of Arts and Culture, and I'm only going to speak briefly, and then we're going to get on to people you really want to hear from. But our mission at the Department of Arts and Culture is to advance arts, culture, and creativity throughout LA County. And most of you know us, but for a few folks who are either not from LA that are with us or don't work with us a lot, we do that in a number of ways. Our core program areas are grants and professional development
Hello?
for the field, as well as, hello, we're all going to be on mute. Hi. As well as arts education, including public-private initiatives to advance equity in arts education and access for all youth and students in LA County, commissioning civic art projects and care of the county's civic art collection, advancing research and evaluation in the arts, fostering cultural equity and inclusion, including leading implementation of the Cultural Equity and Inclusion Initiative, and advancing cross-sector strategies that really advance the arts across sectors of civic life, whether it's in creative career pathways or the economy or justice reform, or embedding artists as creative strategists and artists in residence in county departments, so that artists can help innovate creative ideas to complex civic issues. And it's that idea of artists being uniquely positioned to address civic issues in new ways that's really at the heart of today's engagement. As Margaret was saying or alluding to, from this moment of the COVID health pandemic, we've got that crisis and what all that is in its moment, and that we've not even yet begun to heal and address, but also the systemic inequities it reveals, to the resulting economic crisis and all that is, and the inequities again shown there, to white supremacy, racism, and just the growing disparities in our country. And I'll add a fourth to this conversation, and that is just the distrust in public institutions and really a need for civic engagement. And so as someone who sits at the intersection of arts, philanthropy, and government, I know that we have an opportunity to try to change the narrative on how a government can work, how a government can support community, how a government can invest in Black and Brown youth, how a government can partner with others, and how we can listen as well, and how we can lift up the work of others. And so that's what we're trying to do from our neck of the woods, and center cultural equity in all that we do. I just want to highlight a couple of quick things out of the Cultural Equity and Inclusion Initiative. I want to note that the Board of Supervisors, led by a motion by Supervisor Solis, at the end of 2020, adopted a first ever countywide cultural policy that makes it county policy to affirm the value of the arts, center cultural equity, look at the arts as a partner across sectors, and look at the role of the arts in belonging and diversity and inclusion. And I want to also note the intersections here with our work for arts and justice and the county's adoption of the goals of a countywide plan for elevating the role of arts in justice reform, and the work that we're doing, investing more than $3 million of juvenile justice dollars to provide opportunities for youth who are justice impacted in the arts, and really investing in their voices through arts education and career development. So whether it's increasing our grants or uplifting the role of the arts and artists in a democratic society, that's really all of our undergirding. And of course, now looking at the role of anti-racism as the county adopted its anti-racism policy agenda, and all the shifts that they're making in juvenile justice reform and justice reform more broadly, Measure J, alternatives to incarceration, so many things. But this is also a moment of just broad-based advocacy being needed in so many ways, whether it's arts advocacy or anything else that's important to your community, whether it's housing or affordability, jobs. We know the arts are at the table, and we want to support you in continuing to be at the table. I've played in my life and career, I've been very privileged to play many roles in this field myself, as a performing artist and dancer at one point in time, and a child performer before that. As a practicing attorney, thinking about the role of lobbying or the legalities of our work or contracts or art law, as an arts administrator, and of course in my own identity as a mother, as a Black woman, as a daughter, and as a member of this community. So I just on that want to say, we know you all play multiple roles, and thank you for helping us hold space. And thank you for helping us come together for this event that gets to blend so many things that I care about and that I've been a part of, and so many things that you are all doing in the field, because none of this happens without you. So let's get to it. I am going to welcome now Nona Randois, who is from Alliance for Justice. And they are going to actually spend some time giving us rules of the road and legal training on how lobbying and all that stuff can be done by nonprofits, including yours. So I just want to say quickly, Nona leads the Art for Justice's, not Art for Justice, Alliance for Justice's work in Boulder Advocacy in California. And she supervises their California team and ensures that they offer expert training, resources, and technical assistance to support nonprofits and foundations who are conducting advocacy in our state. So she's a thought leader directing advocacy efforts to protect nonprofit advocacy rights and building partnerships with key partners. There will be a time for Q&A chat with her as well after her presentation. So thank you, Nona. Looks like you're ready to go, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to Kristen and to everybody who has assembled with us here today. My name is Nona Randois. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the California Director of Alliance for Justice's Boulder Advocacy Program. I'm a white woman in my late 40s with long, straight brown hair, really cool gray streaks at the temples, bangs that I impulsively cut during lockdown, and so they're too long because I haven't been able to get them trimmed. I'm wearing a collared dark green and blue flannel dress because I thought other than a time that's this cold, I'm not sure when else I will get to wear something that's flannel. There is some art behind me on the wall. I probably have dog hair stuck on my dress somewhere. It's possible that one of my children or my dog may show up with me at some point today, but I hope it won't be too much of a distraction. And so Boulder Advocacy is the nation's leading legal resource for nonprofits and foundations who want to be active advocates. I'm an attorney that has represented nonprofits in Los Angeles for 25 years, and I'm joining you today from my home on Tongva land in Eagle Rock. And, you know, we're all here today because we know that things are not okay. Things have not been okay. And we are seeing tragic effects of at least 2, if not more, pandemics that we're suffering through, which is COVID-19 and white supremacy and racism. And while we have hope that things can get better, which is another reason why we're all here, we know that they will only get better if we are clear about what we want the world to look like, and if we know how to get what we want, and if we do the work. And the role of the arts is so crucial in that process. We're also here because someone has told us no. Someone has told us that we shouldn't be advocating in a certain way, or that advocacy or lobbying is inappropriate in some way. And so I'm here to tell you that that's not true. And I'm here to give you some tools so that you understand how to navigate those kinds of concerns that are raised in the context of your work and your advocacy. Many of us here in this session are part of nonprofit organizations, nonprofits, or foundations. And there are seemingly complicated rules that make it difficult to fully understand the many ways that nonprofits can advocate legally to policymakers. So that's what I'm here to demystify for you. We're going to cover a lot of ground quickly, and I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. And why can't I find it? Here we go. Sorry about this. I'm having technical difficulties, and I think I am getting there. So there's a few things that I want you to keep in mind. These are kind of the take-home messages. All right, I think that I got my PowerPoint slide up there. Can anyone kind of nod at me or let me know? Give me a thumbs up to let me know if they can see it. Perfect, thank you so much. Okay, so takeaway messages. You can do a lot more advocacy than you think. So that's the first one. Second one is that public charities can lobby and private foundations can fund them. And the third thing is that we have a question and answer session, and I hope to answer all your questions during this training, but even after this session, we are here for you, and we have a lot of resources on our website, a free technical assistance hotline that is staffed by our team of attorneys and advocacy experts for follow-up or for additional questions. So we're here to answer your questions, and even though we can't provide legal advice or be your lawyer, we really want to answer your questions. So please be thinking of questions, be putting them in the chat box during the presentation, and then we will discuss them after. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. This slide shows so many different kinds of advocacy work that are possible for nonprofit organizations. And really the point of this slide is to point out that there's really only one kind of advocacy work that is not allowed for 501c3 organizations, and that is supporting or opposing candidates for elected public office. So that's what that red box that says partisan political activity, that's what that refers to. Everything else on this slide are kinds of advocacy work, and these aren't the only kinds, these are just a good number of them, that nonprofit organizations, and particularly public charities, can do. And not only that, but the activities that are listed in green there, which is everything from building relationships with legislators, organizing, educational work, voter registration, influencing corporations with things like strikes or boycotts, influencing regulations and other government agency efforts, executive actions, things like that. All the ones that are listed in green are things that nonprofits can do all day, every day. They're not limited or restricted in any way. And so some of what we'll talk about in our brief time is how to know the difference between these activities that are not limited in any way and lobbying, which is in yellow. So lobbying, public charities can definitely lobby. That's why I'm here. I like to joke, you'll hear from my boss later, so I have to make sure I say public charities can lobby. I like to joke that I get paid based on how many times I say that. So if you hear that, you know why. But you can lobby, but there are rules that relate to that for 501c3 organizations. So that's why it's in yellow. And that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. So certainly the next thing you're going to ask me is, okay, well, what is lobbying in that case? And just as a general matter, I'll say it's when we're trying to influence legislation, including ballot measures. So I'll talk more about what legislation is specifically, but just keeping that in mind, it doesn't have to do with electing candidates for office. It's about this concept of making new laws, including through ballot measures. And as I said, public charities can lobby. So you see an example on your screen there about the Breathe Act. And this says defund the police, empower communities, tell your congressperson to support the Breathe Act. So this would be considered lobbying. If a nonprofit were to share this image, this is a lobbying communication. So what do I need to know? I already told you public charities can lobby. What do I need to know about that if I'm a nonprofit? Well, there's just a few things that you need to know. One is that there is a limit set by the IRS of how much each public charity can lobby. And public charities need to stay within those limits. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Another is you have to have unrestricted funds to be able to lobby. So we know that government funds typically cannot be used for lobbying. Private foundations are all over the map. And one of the things that we want to do is remind public foundations that they can fund organizations who lobby, that they do not have to place restrictions on their funds, although certainly some of them do. So you do need to just keep that in mind. Thirdly, public charities have to track and report their lobbying activities to the IRS on their 990, which means they have to track staff time and direct costs that are spent on lobbying. So this is what you need to know to be able to lobby as a nonprofit. And now for private foundations, there's another kind of 501c3 called a private foundation. And these are the folks who typically are our funders, especially those nonprofit funders who are getting money from one source or a small number of sources, maybe one family, one corporation. And essentially, these are the folks, they don't fundraise. They already have the money and they're giving it away. So they're 501c3s, but they cannot lobby because they have such concentrated wealth coming from a small amount of sources. So these folks, private foundations, and their individual managers have to pay taxes if they spend money on lobbying. That's what makes them itchy about funding your lobbying efforts. But even though private foundations can't lobby themselves and they can't earmark grants for lobbying, they can fund public charities that lobby. They can do that by providing general support grants to public charities that lobby, and they can do that by providing specific project grants. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about exactly what that is, but I need you all to know that this is something that's possible, and we need to be pushing our private foundation partners on, and our private foundation partners need to be pushing themselves on. So, okay, how much lobbying can public charities do? I mentioned there's a limit. And unfortunately, this is where I have to give my lawyerly answer of it depends. I'm not going to go deep on this, but what I need you to know about this is there's two different choices for how public charities track and report their lobbying, and they have different levels of they set the limits in different ways. So when a new charity is created, the IRS gives it a test by which to measure and report its lobbying. And that default test is called the insubstantial part test. It's a very mushy standard, but essentially what it means is that a group can spend 3 to 5% of its activities and budget on lobbying. It's important to note that if you've never talked to anybody about this, this is probably the test that you're under. And this is based on both paid and volunteer activities. So you have to report volunteer lobbying. If you have folks, anybody who goes out and uses the name of your nonprofit and says, hey, legislator, pass the BREATHE Act, and I'm here from such and so nonprofit, that would be considered volunteer lobbying by that organization that should be reported to the IRS and would be kind of counted against that insubstantial standard. So this is kind of a mess. It's fine, it allows you to lobby, but there is actually a better way. So most public charities have the ability to choose an expenditure test. It's called the 501H expenditure test. I'm just going to try to stick to the term expenditure test. This is essentially a formula that gives you a generous amount in almost all cases of how much a nonprofit can spend on lobbying. And in this case, it's really only expenditures that count. So we don't have to worry about what our volunteers are doing. We don't have to report that. And we also get really clear definitions of lobbying and much easier reporting as well. So that is something that most public charities have the ability to affirmatively choose that will allow them to maximize their lobbying. So as I said, there's just these two tests. If you're under the default test, the insubstantial part test, it's a little mushy, but you're looking at approximately 3 to 5% of your activities and budget. If you're under the expenditure test, this is just an example because there's a formula that would apply that would be based on your annual expenditures. But as an example, if there's a group that has annual expenditures of $4 million, in this case, that group would be able to spend $350,000 on lobbying in a calendar year, which is almost 10%. So you can see even there that this group can do more lobbying. Not only that, but there are activities that actually don't count as lobbying that don't even have to be counted in that 10%. So there's really a lot of benefit to maximizing the amount of advocacy you can do in an organization by making the 501H election, choosing the expenditure test. Okay. Hopefully, I'm happy to answer questions about that. I know it's a little esoteric, but it is important. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat or follow up later. I'm going to go on to talk about what does lobbying mean? What is lobbying specifically, especially for public charities who are using the expenditure test and for private foundations? Because as I said, you don't want to be asking them to earmark funds for these activities because they can't do that. So First thing in the definition of lobbying, there's actually two different pieces of the definition: direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying. So let's talk about direct lobbying. Direct lobbying is when you're communicating with a government official and you're expressing a view about specific legislation. So communication is almost any form of communication. You know, back in the old days, we used to go meet with people in person. Now we're doing almost everything on social media and digitally. But whether you're writing a letter or, you know, Instagramming or TikToking or whatever you're doing, those are all kinds of communications that can be lobbying. Government officials. These folks are legislators and other kinds of officials and their staff at any level of government, including the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives, state legislatures, tribal councils, county board of supervisors, and city councils. It also includes presidents, mayors, and others who participate in the formulation of legislation. Of course, we know they sign or veto legislation, right? Government officials, interestingly, also include all of us as voters when we vote on ballot measures. So certainly supporting and opposing ballot measures does count as lobbying. It does have to be done within the lobbying limits of a 501c3, so we can do it and we have to report it. And for those who are using the expenditure test, just know that it counts as direct lobbying. The nice idea is that all of us as voters are the legislature. So this is when you're reaching out to someone, voters to say, vote yes on Measure J, you're doing direct lobbying. Other kinds of specific legislation. So federal, state, county, city budgets are legislative. Bills and ordinances, whether they are introduced or whether you're proposing a specific idea that hasn't been introduced yet, those are also legislation. So I give the example here of the regional blueprint for arts education that was passed as a motion by the LA County Board of Supervisors. Also important to keep in mind, nominations that are confirmed by legislators also count as lobbying. So those will be coming up in the Biden administration as he nominates cabinet members, hopefully lots of federal judges that he's going to nominate very quickly. Those will be voted on by the Senate. And so those are things that we as nonprofit public charities were allowed to weigh in on. And when we support a particular person or oppose a particular person, we ask our senators to vote to confirm or not to vote to confirm. That's a lobbying activity and something that we are allowed to engage in. So things that are not legislation, regulations, and any other kinds of rules that are made by government agencies. When a government agency is acting within its own jurisdiction, whatever it's doing is not legislative. Legislation really has to do with a legislative body voting on something. And so unless the city council, county board, state ledge, or tribal council or federal Congress is voting on something, it's probably not legislation. That would include executive orders, which of course we know that the legislature doesn't have to vote on. Any kind of enforcement of existing laws, whether it's through litigation or some other means, is typically not legislation. And the IRS further carves out some particular areas they call special purpose bodies. So district attorneys, sheriff, police. So there's so much, we know that these actors and agencies have so much power and they have so much impact. And those policies, when the county board or the city council doesn't have to vote on them, they're not legislative. So that is an area of lots of opportunity for all of us, and something we don't even have to track and report to the IRS, and that we can ask private foundations to earmark funds for. School boards and other special purpose bodies also are just carved out. Again, as long as the county board and the or city council is not voting on those things, they're just not legislative. So, you know, working on those kinds of rules, regulations, and policies is not lobbying under IRS rules. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to talk about grassroots lobbying. So this is a different audience, right? Grassroots lobbying is not when we're directly communicating with government officials, but now we're communicating with the general public. This is all of our social media, you know, all of our online communications and more. So in this case, and remember, we're not talking about ballot measures. We said those count as direct lobbying. So we're communicating with the general public about things that they don't get a direct vote on. And that's why under the expenditure test, the IRS says you need this additional piece called a call to action for this to count as lobbying. What's a call to action? Telling people to contact their legislators, providing contact information or a mechanism to communicate with legislators, or identifying legislators in certain ways. So here's an example. I showed this before, defund the police, tell your congressperson to support the Breathe Act, okay? So right here it has call to action because it says tell your congressperson to support. This of course links to a mechanism to contact your legislators. So this is going to generate an email from you to your legislator asking them to support the Breathe Act. Both of those things are calls to action, and I just want to say, even if this did not link to the petition, it would be a call to action because it says tell your congressperson to support the Breathe Act. So one other kind of call to action is when you provide contact information. So just giving the phone number of a legislator with a message that says call now for a Clean Dream Act, that would be a call to action. That's us expressing a view about specific legislation. Here I have a different example though. So let's say a nonprofit says we support the Restart Act. The Restart Act provides support for performing artists and venues, and it talks about what the Restart Act does in a very supportive way. Well, this is a communication with the general public. I presume that this is posted on social media. It expresses a view about specific legislation. We support the Restart Act, but there's no call to action here. We don't tell anyone to contact their legislator. We don't provide a mechanism to contact. We don't provide contact information. We're not talking about any specific legislators in a certain way. So this is not lobbying for private foundations, and it's not lobbying for nonprofit public charities that are using the expenditure test. If you're under the default test, it's a lot less clear whether or not this would count as lobbying. You might want to go ahead and track it and report it if you're still under the default test. But just, you know, good to know under the expenditure test that we have these real specific rules to help us know what counts and what doesn't count. There are a few things that are exceptions to the definition of lobbying, things that otherwise would seem like lobbying, but the IRS just says this is carved out, this does not count as lobbying. I'm really only going to focus on the first two because the last two are not very used, they're very narrow and specific. So nonpartisan analysis, study, or research is when you know, somebody does research, they produce a study, you see a portrait of LA County up there. And, you know, if your report has facts, it's a full and fair analysis, and it's broadly distributed, it can make recommendations about policy. It can suggest certain policy outcomes as a conclusion to all this research, and it does not count as lobbying. As long as you're not sending it out directly with a please contact your legislator kind of grassroots call to action, that is something that does not count as lobbying. Request for technical assistance is a great one. This is for you folks who are well connected or are getting well connected, who are building those relationships with your legislators. and you see a picture of Amanda Wynn testifying. When you are asked in writing by a government body to give input on something, you can comply with that. And it may be that you're giving your opinion to support or oppose specific legislation, but it just doesn't count as lobbying as long as you have a written invitation from a government body. So those government bodies that are out there today, can you ask folks in writing to show up and ask and tell you what they think about something? It might make life a lot easier for them and their funders to be able to have that kind of dialogue. So this is a great exception as well. Just want to mention everything I've said so far was really about rules for 501c3s because of their tax status that limit the amount of lobbying they can do. Don't prohibit it, but limit the amount of lobbying they can do at all levels of government, right? So whether it's the federal Breathe Act, whether it's the local budget, everything in between, if it's legislative, it goes under that limit for nonprofit public charities. There are other laws out there that require disclosure. They do not limit the amount of work that you do, but they do require reporting in some instances. So if you are supporting or opposing ballot measures, there may be some disclosures that you need to do, especially if you're doing a lot of that work to the FPPC, the state agency that regulates and discloses ballot measure spending to Californians. You may need to do reports to the state of California if you're lobbying, or disclose your local lobbying, for instance, in the city of LA. Those do not limit how much lobbying you can do. And we do have resources on all of those different reporting requirements. So you can find those on boulderadvocacy.org. We have many resources. We have a new podcast. We have fact sheets and technical assistance available in Spanish as well as English. And as I mentioned, we have resources on local lobbying ordinances as well. So just want to wrap up here and say public charities can and should lobby to change the law. You need to stay within your annual lobbying limit, track and report your lobbying to the IRS, and use funds that don't prohibit lobbying. Choosing the expenditure test will allow most public charities to do more advocacy. Knowing the definitions of lobbying will make it easier to report and get grants for advocacy work. And private foundations can fund public charities that lobby. Many activities that influence policy and have a dramatic impact will not even count as lobbying, like administrative advocacy that we talked about. And we are here to help you navigate all of this. Please don't hesitate to be putting those questions in the chat, as well as those questions that if we aren't able to get to them today, or if you want to raise them with us later, we are here for you. So with that, I want to make sure you have our contact information, and I think we're ready to turn over to questions. And I'm going to see if I can find the chat box, but also if anybody wants to pop in and help lift up some questions that have come in, that would be great as well.
Hi, Nona. We have a question from James Silva. His question is, what are the consequences for failure to report, and could a nonprofit lose their status?
Great question. So yes, it is, I'm going to go ahead and say theoretically possible for a nonprofit to lose their tax-exempt status. It is actually possible. It is very uncommon. But I don't say that because I'm encouraging you to ignore these rules. I wouldn't be here doing that if that was my thought. But you know, complying with this just puts you in a stronger position. It takes away a tool that people can use to attack you. And you don't want to give anybody any additional handles with which to take you down. You want to be focused on the work that you need to do, on telling that narrative, changing that story, changing the law. You want to be focused on that. And so you don't want to just have something out there where there's not compliance. We see much more concern with funders, with PR, kind of, you know, the local press writing a story or something like that. So it is possible to, you know, if to get randomly drawn for an audit, or even to be reported to the IRS is probably more likely. Once you have those some powerful opposition, they may, you know, want to make this an issue, and that's why compliance is important, so that you don't make yourself more vulnerable to that kind of attack.
Thank you so much. Another question from the chat. Could you clarify if call to action falls within acceptable activity?
Yeah, so making a call to action on a, so when we're a, you know, nonprofit using the expenditure test, or we're a private foundation. Let me back up. It depends on if you're a private foundation or if you're a public charity. So if you're a private foundation and you are meeting all the other criteria, so you're communicating with the general public and you're expressing a view about specific legislation, then you probably wouldn't want to have a call to action, because private foundations can't lobby. Private foundations can say this message: we support the Restart Act, as long as they don't have a call to action. For those public charities out there that can lobby, absolutely, you absolutely can have a call to action. And that's just something that you will track and report as grassroots lobbying under your grassroots lobbying limit, or as general lobbying, depending on which test you use. I hope that answers your question. So yes, please make those calls to action. I see a question here asking, oh, sorry, it's related. So does asking people to sign a petition for an issue that doesn't have specific legislation pending count as grassroots lobbying? And that's a related question. So I want to say, if you look at these factors on the left side, I say if you don't have all of the ingredients, then you're not making a chocolate cake, right? So you need each one of those ingredients for your activity to be called lobbying. So if there is not legislation, if this is just an issue, then having a call to action doesn't make it lobbying, because you don't have that specific legislation piece. Now, but also within this question, I want to say, you said an issue that doesn't have specific legislation pending. If you're really in the position, or others in coalition with you are really in the position of shopping a particular piece of legislation, so it hasn't been introduced yet, but you really do have a a specific proposal that maybe you're trying to get people to introduce, that would still count as specific legislation. But if it's an issue that either would be broader than any one legislative action, or it would be taken by other an administrative agency, or it's just much more general, then that wouldn't be specific legislation. So even if you have that call to action piece, again, you don't have all the ingredients for your chocolate cake because you don't have legislation.
Thank you, Nona. There's another question in the chat, and forgive me if you've already answered this in a prior response. While private foundations cannot directly fund lobbying, can a portion of project funds be used for advocacy work? And just confirming that they've heard correctly that that portion of the work would need to be reported.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, you know, in my view, the way that we use the terms, we see advocacy as really broad, and then lobbying is one form of advocacy. If you think back to that first slide, we had lots of kinds of advocacy, and lobbying is one. So certainly for non-lobbying advocacy, you know, I'm not aware of any reason why, you know, unless it's specific to a certain situation, you could use private foundation money for that. Now, private foundations can fund and public charities can use private foundation dollars for lobbying efforts as long as it's not prohibited by the particular grant agreement. So for a general support grant, you know, public charities can use those dollars for lobbying. But what the private foundation can't agree to that. They can't agree that you're going to use their money for lobbying. So there is a very kind of specific rule that some private foundations use. It's not super commonly used, but some foundations use it, called a specific project grant. And in that situation, your nonprofit may have a project that is funded by more than one funder, and that project may do some lobbying. And you would apply to a private foundation to fund that project. And they would ask you how much of that project is lobbying and how much is not. And they can give you a grant up to the amount of the project that is not lobbying. So again, that's a real specific rule that some foundations use. It shows you that you shouldn't be scared to talk to your funders about lobbying, especially if you understand, you know, what their orientation is, what their restrictions are. Because there are times when they may be able to fund it as long as you can account for it properly. And this is something that we answer questions about all the time on our technical assistance line. Really happy to walk people through, hey, my funder is asking me this question, you know, don't assume that you should never admit that you're lobbying, or always say, no, we're not, because you may be able to get funding that you can use in that kind of a situation.
Okay, another question from the chat. If our public charity raises funds to donate to an organization that supports lobbying of legislation, does our organization have to report that lobbying?
If our public charity raises funds to donate to an organization that supports lobbying or legislation, does our organization have to report lobbying? So the answer to that is, if you earmark those funds, when you give those funds to the other organization, if you earmark them for lobbying, then you would have to report it. It also is somewhat problematic if, when you raise money, you tell donors, this money is for lobbying. Because if a donor gives a nonprofit money earmarked for lobbying, that's not tax deductible for them. And it would be taxable if it's a private foundation, right? So, so generally when you're raising money, you're not specifically saying, hey, give us money to lobby, right? You can say, hey, give us money, we do amazing advocacy. That's fine, but you know, you're not specifically usually wanting to earmark the money that donors give you for lobbying. When one public charity gives a grant or a contract or whatever to another public charity, if that money is earmarked for the recipient to use for lobbying, then yes, the first public charity would have to report it as against their lobbying limit. So it would get kind of double counted in that sense, but totally possible to do.
Awesome. We have another sort of comment from the chat that I think is helpful to share, and I'm wondering if you could speak to it. One of our grantee organizations said that a former supporter threatened to report them to the IRS for a statement in support of Black Lives Matter. And they were able to explain to them the concerns and non-legitimacy of that threat, but wanting you to speak to how an individual and organization can approach that type of situation if it happens to them.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm so glad that first of all that you made a statement in support of Black Lives Matter, and that you were able to navigate that discussion with your supporter or your former supporter. And that's right. That's not how it works, right? As nonprofit organizations, and especially as public charities, we can have any policy preference that we want to have, and that's fine. We can talk about policy. We can talk about how we should treat each other, what the rules should be, what the law should be. And so back to the very first slide, the only thing we cannot do is support or oppose candidates for elected office. And, if you want to do that, start a C4. I say that like it's super easy, but it can be done, right? A lot of groups are doing it. So, but I'm so glad that, that you are having those conversations. And I think it taking away kind of the misperception that this is illegal allows us to really talk more about our values and who we want to be. And, I know that there's sometimes are those fears of alienating people, but at the same time, if we don't have those conversations and demonstrate our values and who we want to be, then, what good are we doing as nonprofits? So I agree. It sounds very annoying that you had to go through that. But I think it really speaks to you that you had that conversation, and hopefully, whether you change that person's heart and mind, you were able to go forward and stand up for your values. And so that's great. Thank you for sharing that story. And I would say that is really much more of the kind of concern that is out there for this kind of work, more so than the fear of losing your tax exempt status, which is the ultimate kind of threat that the IRS has in this sphere. It just doesn't happen very much. They're very underfunded, and they're really not seeking out this activity. They're happy, if you're reporting your lobbying and they see it's under your limit and it says, okay, limit is 350,000 and this group spent 200,000, move on, right? So it's a report and we can do it.
Another related question. Now that digital costs can be lower than in the past, does the IRS more closely monitor what that 3 to 5% can fund?
Interesting question. Thank you. So I was having the opposite conversation today with some colleagues who were saying, we're spending a lot more on our digital presence than we were before because we have to have more robust Zoom accounts and other things like that, right? Whether or not the costs are lower than they were in the past, I would say that an important thing to keep in mind is that you're building some overhead into whatever you're reporting, whatever dollars you're reporting for lobbying. And typically, your digital costs, the cost of buying your computers and having Wi-Fi and having Zoom accounts or whatever else, is going to be part of your overhead expenses. So, typically you're tracking for, let's say, this call to action that's showing on the screen right now, this petition, you're tracking the staff time that it took for somebody to create this. And you're applying a certain overhead percentage to that staff time. And then if there's a direct cost that's specific to something, those are really the three main categories. But the digital costs are really part of that overhead cost. So just as long as you build that into the financials that you're reporting, there should not be a problem. Also, just a reminder, the 3 to 5% is for those under the default test, and for those who choose the expenditure test, many times that percentage will be much higher. And the reporting is much easier. So there will be financial reporting that's part of the expenditure test, but there's also narrative reporting and other things that reflect that volunteer activity, as I mentioned. We're really happy to go through with people any of the reporting questions. We can go into looking at the IRS forms with you, all that stuff. Happy to go through on our technical assistance service.
Now, based on what you've experienced and what you know as an expert in the field, what is a first step that organizations and individuals can take to begin integrating advocacy into their work?
Thank you. I think, there are so many right first steps. I think to me, I would look for something, it's really about mission, right? It's really about being really clear on your mission and your constituency, and starting with something that's really close to home. If you haven't done this before, what is one step that folks either out there are working on or that you could be a leader on that's really closest to your mission as an organization? And then just knowing what's going on, other folks out there, what are they doing? And, one thing that's important to keep in mind is that with advocacy, none of us can do this on our own. There's no one nonprofit that ever wins systems change, right? Not even a policy change. So we always need multiple voices to get to where we're going. And so remember that even if you haven't been doing this work, adding your voice to existing efforts is very important. It's very strong, strengthening, helpful. Our elected officials want to hear from lots of folks, not just one organization that's seen as a powerhouse of advocacy. So I say focus on your mission, and then look to your partners, look to the field, what is going on, where you can join efforts and kind of build up your practice. That's one way to approach it. There's so many ways, though. There's so much room for all of us to be involved.
All right, Nona, what about some local organizations that you maybe partnered with or are familiar with that you would recommend maybe to those of our participants who are want to get involved and need some help on where to start?
Well, that's great. That's a really great segue into the rest of the conversation today, because like many of you, I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists and all of the work that they're doing. I think they're going to lift up lots of opportunities. And so, sorry, there's trucks going by. But I think they're going to lift up lots of opportunities. So, we have Community Coalition talking today. We have Arts for LA. I hate to even start naming them because I'm going to leave someone out. But, there are the Justice LA Coalition. I know that folks are focused on thinking a lot about criminal justice reform, our leaders in that space. So, so many places to help get you connected. And for folks who have specific areas they're interested in, if you don't hear something today, feel free to send me an email or call our technical assistance hotline, because we have probably worked with a group in whatever field it is that you're most interested in. We probably have someone that we could refer you to, because there's so many people out there doing great work. I just want to say thank you so much to Kristen and her team. I think we are to the end of our time, and I don't see too many more questions here. So thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate this forum, and really looking forward to what the rest of our speakers have to say today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, incredible. And I hope everybody will join me in thanking you, Nona, and Alliance for Justice, for all of those tools, all of that concrete knowledge. I know firsthand there's a lot of depth and detail that can go into all the legalities around it, but thank you so much for summarizing it. There were definitely questions in the chat about whether folks can access a PowerPoint that gives them some of this information, or what are the kind of tools or resources that we could share out. So will you be giving us a website or link or PowerPoint that we can share?
Yes, I will definitely send you this PowerPoint, and you can share it out with the other materials from the session. And I know there were some other links that we're sharing out as well. So, and so you have that, and then you have boulderadvocacy.org, and you have our technical assistance hotline. And you can email me at nona@afj.org. So we'll get you the resources that you need. I look forward to working with all of you. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to transition and bring up Nan Aaron, and I'm going to talk with Nan a little bit. Before we do that, or as we do that, I just want to pick up on something Nona was saying, which is, again, the LA cultural field and the national cultural field, and all of our colleagues and allies around are so incredible. So we haven't named, how many amazing people are in the room, because it'd just be too many, but we see you, Tia Chucha, we see you, Self Help Graphics, and all of our grantees in the LA Phil and Skirball Center, and Armory, and Leslie Ito, and Bloomberg Philanthropies, and Ford Foundation, and former staff of ours who have gone on to great things at Metro Arts or City of Santa Fe. We see all of you, and our commissioners, Pamela Bright Moon, and so many great folks in the room. Thank you for being here. I want to share there will be a break. We're going to actually take a 5 or 10 minute break after this next conversation. And then after that, we're going to bring up our artists. So moving on, I want to introduce another friend of the cause from Alliance for Justice. It's Nan Aaron. She's the founder and president of Alliance for Justice, or I think maybe just was. I think she's transitioning on in her life and career. But our Alliance for Justice has really been known as the leading progressive advocacy organization on issues since its inception in 1979. And under Nan's leadership, Alliance for Justice, AFJ, grew to become a national association of more than 130 groups representing all kinds of progressive constituencies. And so they have some major programs, a justice program and the Boulder Advocacy Initiative. So this is our chance to hear a bit from Nan on really the big view around Alliance for Justice. So Nan, thank you so much for being here and being with us. I want to just start with asking you to just tell us the origin story of Alliance for Justice. What was the seed for the organization and for starting the Boulder Advocacy Program?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. What an exciting time for everyone. And my hat's off to all of you who've put a wonderful program together. My pronouns are she, her. I have green eyes. I'm white. My hair is generally short, but it's a little longer due to the pandemic. And I often have a smile on my face because I went to college in the Midwest and everyone told me to smile. And it's been a life lesson since then. So Alliance for Justice was founded in 1979. Boulder Advocacy was started a few years after. And it began because President Reagan, formerly governor of California, when he came into office in 1980, he thought, I'd really like to defund the left. I'd like to do in those pesky groups, the environmental groups, the abortion groups, consumer groups, civil rights groups. So he came up with a directive. And the directive basically said that any organization in the country who engaged in any form of advocacy, not just lobbying, but talking to a newspaper reporter, talking to an agency official, a school board, a housing authority, filing a brief in court, any of those activities constituted advocacy and would, if a group carried out those activities, couldn't apply for any federal money. Ronald Reagan assumed that only liberal groups did advocacy and therefore wouldn't be entitled to get federal funds. Well, all these thousands of organizations came together from every corner of the country, every issue. We beat it back. But while we won that battle, we lost that war because somehow the notion about advocacy being somewhat unseemly, somewhat inappropriate, even illegal, gained a foothold in the thinking, primarily of progressive groups. And we decided to combat that. We would start getting information out to organizations across the political spectrum, alerting them to what advocacy was, and particularly how lawful, appropriate, and important it was for organizations to get out there and to influence decision-making. Once we set up that program, we decided, you know what? After establishing our office in DC, we would next go to California. Because as all you know, where California goes, so goes the nation. And it was a particularly difficult moment in California. There have been a series of initiatives passed by the voters that were harmful to immigrants, harmful to public school children, harmful to people who really live at the margins and in poverty. And we realized that business groups were well equipped with not just resources, but with lawyers who could advise them what to do, when they could do it, and how to do it. And we realized, let's start in California and let's work with organizations in the state, making our information available so that organizations will speak up, speak out, and do it courageously. And we opened a tiny little office in Oakland, and we've been off to the races ever since in the state and love our work there.
That's incredible. And it's amazing how much of that is still happening today, right? The ways that folks will assemble teams of lawyers and draft legislation and identify judges and, take over radio and other broadcast airwaves. And so the more we think about the values we have, whether it's that everyone deserves arts education or whether it's about anti-racism and inclusion, how much it's important to be able to have space in the airwaves or on the legislative agenda. So related to that, why do you think it's so important that nonprofits know and understand, the rules around like lobbying or ballot initiatives or campaigns or issue advocacy?
Kristen, I think there's so many myths out there that suggests that nonprofits shouldn't engage in certain activities. I think our opponents often threaten us that if we do carry out a certain activity, they'll pick up the phone or email someone at the IRS. And we figured the way to empower nonprofits is, and foundations, not just nonprofits, but funders as well, is to help them understand what the rules are, because with understanding really comes empowerment. None of us like to live our lives with uncertainty. We've certainly had enough uncertainty over the past 4 years, and certainly with the pandemic. We figured by helping groups understand what the rules are, we can put a little certainty in people's lives and therefore help them speak out as much as they can, but also at the same time, know where the lines are, where the boundaries are, so they don't get in trouble.
Yeah. And why do we think, funders maybe are afraid to support advocacy or support groups that do advocacy, or why are boards, nervous about this? What do you hear about that?
Well, I'm happy to say that I've seen a huge shift, and I would say particularly in California. When we opened our office in Oakland, I remember picking up the phone and calling some funders in LA and saying, let's do a panel on advocacy. And the funder said, nope, no way, we're not ready. Well, just a few weeks ago, I picked up a speech by the former or president who's leaving the Weingart Foundation, and I read his speech. I think it's Fred Ali. Oh my goodness, it's filled with inspiring words about the need to do advocacy. So I'm glad to see that the people understand the gospel. But having said that, with turnover in foundations, I think a lot of people come on board and they get nervous. Why do they get nervous? Because funders don't like controversy. Boards in particular don't like controversy. Board members are afraid that perhaps their names will get into articles in the local newspaper that tie them to major organizing that's going on. I would say important organizing that's going on. But for years, foundations have really shied away from getting involved in funding work that they deem to be too controversial, too political. And it's really been the work of Boulder Advocacy to convince funders that not only is it legal, but it's appropriate for them to be funding organizations that engage in all the advocacy activities, as well as funders themselves can engage in advocacy. Now, as Nona said, they can't lobby, they can't get involved in electoral work, but there is so much activity that even funders themselves can speak out on. And just because you go work for a foundation doesn't mean you give up your First Amendment rights to speak up. So I also think by encouraging funders to put organizers on their boards, advocates on their boards, that we will gradually change the culture that exists with foundations and their boards as well.
I love it. I love it. I remember when the Queen's Museum hired a community organizer for the first time for the museum, but now putting organizers on the board, that's the next step. I love it. So what about, just a couple more questions for you, but I'm curious from your vantage point, how have you seen the arts in your work? Have you seen arts or artists or arts organizations taking part in advocacy? We're going to hear from some amazing artists, activists, advocates later today, but in your work, have you seen that?
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned arts groups, because if we go back to that fight we had in the early 1980s, arts groups were a critical segment of that coalition that was put together. Arts groups were just incredibly important partners. And as you all know on this forum, not only do you have a right to speak out on public issues, but I think you have a duty and obligation, like the rest. I would also say this. We're in, as you all know from your lives and from your work, we're in tough times for so many reasons. And we're going to face the fact that budgets, particularly state budgets, local government, county budgets, foundation budgets, might be decreased in amount. And there's going to be a huge competition among nonprofits for even scarcer funds. And you're going to say to yourselves, you know, there are groups that feed the poor, groups that need to provide housing for people. All of that is true. But I want to say that arts organizations, particularly at this moment, are so critically important to our democracy. All we have to do is remember Amanda Gorman's beautiful speech. Her speech is probably what most people will remember from that inauguration. And again, just taking us back in time a little to the 1929 to 1933, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, created some wonderful programs to get America back on its feet when we were facing a depression. And who were the groups and who were the people that were prioritized by FDR's administration? It was artists. Artists were called in, tens of thousands of artists from around the country were relied on to produce canvases, murals, pictures. They got funding from the federal government. And I certainly hope that all of you will know and acknowledge that artists at this moment in time not only deserve to get your messages out, but will feel free and courageous to speak out with your messages, because we need to hear it. We need you to be courageous, and it's really important for society and our democracy. So go for it. The water's fine, come on in.
Thank you so much. That was actually perfect. I was going to ask you, you know, given where we are and how when we held similar programs and trainings like this, it often was leading up to an election. Well, hey, we just finished the election in 2020. What's the point of staying engaged now? But you really just put it all on the table there. And so we so appreciate everything that you've done at Alliance for Justice. All throughout the years, and Boulder Advocacy, and supporting the role of nonprofits, educating and empowering and giving those tools, and for bringing some of that here today for the cultural community to find their voice, whether it's, you know, issue advocacy on arts education, or whether it's really getting involved in other ways in the community, or really proactively stepping forward in legislation. So helpful to hear from you. So appreciate your work and your voice, Nan, and thank you, Nona, as well, for those resources. We know the arts are vital, and so we want them to be empowered and vital. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to ask our team, Laura, to come up, and yes, I see in the chat, we need to bring back the Federal Theater Program, Writers Program, WPA, yes. I'm going to bring back our team to take us through what's next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Nan and Nona. We're going to take a 10-minute break, everyone. So please come back into the room at 2:50 and we'll begin with our artist presentations. Can't wait to join you soon.
like the wind blowing through your hair. Well, come on, roll with me till the sun goes down. Texas sun, say you wanna hit the highway while the engine roars. Well, come on, roll with me till the sun goes down. The Texas sun, oh yeah. Texas sun, caressing you from Fort Worth to Amarillo. Well, come on, roll with me till the sun dips low. Texas sun, Texas sun, oh girl. Texas sun. When I'm far from home and them cold winds blow, stuck out somewhere, the folks I don't know. 'Cause you keep me nice and you keep me warm. Wanna feel you on me, can't wait to get back there again. Texas sun, Texas sun, Texas sun, Texas sun. You say you like the wind blowing through your hair. Well, come on, roll with me till the sun goes down. Texas sun, Texas sun. Oh, baby, you're so gorgeous. How about you and me? Take a little trip in the big body. Take a ride with me, babe. You by my side. How does it sound? You and I. Oh, girl. Take a ride with me, babe. You by my side. How does it sound? You and I. Baby, oh. Take a ride with me, babe. You by my side. How does it sound? You and I. That's life. If we had more time, we could live forever. Just you and I, we could be together. That's life. If we had more time, we could live forever. Just you and I, we could be together. That's life. We can play like children play. We can say like children say. Just you and I, having up the time. We get wise when we grow old. Get slow when we grow old. Just you and I, having up the time. Do you know? Here we go. That's life. If we have more time, we can live forever. Just you and I, we can be together. That's life. If we have more time, we can live forever. Just you and I, we can be together. That's life. We can rhyme like children rhyme. We can time like children time. Just you and I, having up the time. Make a plan for when we old. Reminisce when we get old. Just you and I, having up the time. Do you know? Here we go. That's life.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed a break from Zoom. Now I'd like to bring back our director, Kristen Sakota, to introduce our next speaker.
Excellent. All right. Hi, thank you so much, Laura, for the break and the music. Hopefully everybody's back. So I have the pleasure of introducing this next section of the event. And, you know, as we envisioned this program, we wanted to bring local social justice artists and movement builders together in conversation. Now, each of these artists is a visionary, a dedicated member of their community, and a humble responder to their community's needs. And we asked each of them if they would share with us their arts and advocacy work in the context of present and the historical, considering personal moments of their politicization and the future that they're building through their work and their practice and with their communities and the organizations that they work with and lead. So each of the artists is going to be just given the floor to present individually. And then we're going to have our esteemed friend and colleague, Alberto Ratana of Community Coalition, who's going to guide and moderate a conversation with the group about their work and about how we as the arts and culture community can be informed, allied, and become part of the movement or inspired. So thank you, Alberto, for that in advance. So if everybody is ready to go and back, I am excited to introduce the first artist that is going to present. Our first artist presenter is Patrice Cullors. And Patrice is an artist, an organizer, a freedom fighter from Los Angeles, California, and so much more. Patrice is the co-founder and executive director of Black Lives Matter Global Foundation and a founder of the Reform LA Jails Yes on Our campaign, a ballot initiative that passed by a 73% landslide victory in March 2020. She's also a performance artist, a Fulbright scholar, popular public speaker, and a Sydney Peace Prize recipient. Cullors is currently the faculty director of Arizona's Prescott College, their new social and environmental arts practice MFA program, first of its kind in the nation, and she's exhibited widely across LA and in the United States. Outside of performance and activism, Cullors is a New York Times bestselling author of When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir, which just had recently its young audience's release. So with that, I am thrilled. And a wonderful woman who was on the internet talking about her black hair. I had so much to say and I could not, I was like, we just need to talk about that later. I was like, what? All right, I am gonna step out of the way and give you the floor. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Patrice.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, team, for showing up. I just want to be clear, am I the one managing my slideshow, or are you all managing the slideshow?
We'll manage it for you. Are you ready?
For you.
I'm ready, yeah. Cool, we can go to the next slide. That was a very long bio that was read. It's always embarrassing. Thank you so much, team. We can go to the next slide. I'm grateful to spend a couple minutes, we can go to the next slide, talking about my practice and the practice that connects community. And so some of the projects that I'm highlighting here is the Crenshaw Dairy Mart, an artist collective and gallery space that I co-founded with Alexander Deris and Noé Olivas. Its pillars are abolition, ancestry, and healing. We believe in an abolitionist art practice, one that centers care and dignity, and that challenges the current police and prison state that we live in, a culture that has created an economy around punishment. Reform LA Jails is the second project I'll be talking about. It was a ballot measure that I helped chair with thousands of other people who helped win Yes on R. And through that program, we ran a pretty extensive arts initiative through Reform LA Jails. Dignity and Power Now is the third project that I'll spend a little bit of time on. It's the first organization that I ever founded, looking at the issues of jail violence inside the Los Angeles jail system. This organization was actually birthed out of an art project called Stained, an intimate portrayal of state violence, where I examine the torture survivors of the sheriff's department and the families who are to tend to those torture survivors after their experience. And the last project, probably what I'm most known for, is the Black Lives Matter Global Network, which is now, it started out of a hashtag, which is now a global organization that's inside the US, the UK, and Canada, and has a very significant art and cultural programming. Go to the next slide. Some of the projects that have been developed with these organizations, Reform LA Jails launched its inaugural exhibition in collaboration with the Crenshaw Dairy Mart. And we had Yes on R, Archives and Legal Conceptions, in which the curators, Alexander Doris and Autumn Breon Williams, took a look back at the archives of Dignity and Power Now and what led us almost 8 years later to create a ballot measure. And they did it through obviously a curatorial lens and a archival lens and also an artistic lens. And it felt really important for this exhibit to ground the work of the local work that has happened in Los Angeles for decades through an artistic practice, because art has always been at the center of it. The second project that I'm showing is the Crenshaw Dairy Mart. The Crenshaw Dairy Mart launched 3 weeks before quarantine, and we launched, and then the world shut down. And for the three of us artists, all we could think about was the impact this was going to have on artists. This quarantine was going to have an artist. And we created a project called Care Not Cages that essentially ran all year. This mural that you're looking at was designed by Noe Olivas as part of a project that we did where we launched an artist relief fund in which we provided funds to artists, and then specifically provided funds to incarcerated artists. We then curated a Care Not Cages digital exhibit and sold mostly incarcerated artists' work and gave 100% of those sales back to those artists. We can go to the next slide. Black Lives Matter just launched a Write Black Love Letters campaign. And this campaign really came out of us wanting to transform how we understand the movement. So much of the way in which people frame our movement is that we're about Black death, but that's never actually what we've said we are about. It's what the media has focused on. In fact, we are about Black life and Black people thriving. And so this campaign was curated by Noni Lamar, who is a creative lead inside of Black Lives Matter, in which we had folks do stamps, create not official stamps, but create a stamp, and these stamps turned into postcards, and we encouraged people to write Black love letters to folks as a way to also talk about what was happening and what is happening to the USPS, and really looking at the USPS as one of the first, Black jobs, stable Black, strong working class jobs. So there was a lot of different connections we were trying to make with this campaign. The next project is of my personal practice. This is a piece I did at the Broad last February, looking at the intersections of, actually aestheticizing the Reform LA Jail's ballot measure. And so what you're not seeing in this is that those wings are actually made of my brother's old clothes. My brother has schizoaffective disorder. I'm a huge advocate of his, and much of my world and my work revolves around what has happened to my family, specifically living in Los Angeles, and the terrible mental health care system that exists here. And so this work is what took my brother's old clothes. I created these wings, these battery operated wings, and then the nest was developed. And in the piece, I kind of walked back and forth to the Reform LA Jail's language. And so I had recorded the actual legal language of Reform LA Jails and took those clothes off of the Broad trees and created this nest. This piece is really looking at the intersection of home, mental health, and what it looks like to develop a new world, and what it looks like to create new worlds, worlds that don't exist yet, but that we long to exist. We can go to the next slide. The latest project that I'm working on is with the Crenshaw Dairy Mart. We just recently launched a project called Pray for LA, and the project serves as a way to acknowledge and honor that we are in a collective grief. We are in collective grief with the impact of racism and the lack of healthcare infrastructure in our communities that are affected by COVID-19. And we started the Pray for LA project to help make visible all the families suffering in this moment. And it serves as a space and a reminder that we all need each other so much right now. I think, it's really important that we don't do a lot of collective grieving in this society, but I feel like collective grieving is a really important healing opportunity. And because in a lot of ways, funerals have been halted because of COVID-19, there's a lot of pent up grief. And so this project is going to be a series of happenings and commissioning artists to sort of come into this call with us to pray for LA. And we'll spend the year working on this project. You can go to the next slide.
That's the last slide.
Great. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you. I mean, there's so much richness in your work and in what you just shared. So I have to leave it to Alberto to go into the depths of the conversation, but so much just for me that I'm excited to hear more about, and so appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. So I am going to take the privilege to introduce our next presenter, and that is artist Lauren Halsey is going to be joining us next. She's an artist. She's a community organizer, rethinking possibilities on art, architecture, and community engagement. Since March 2020 of quarantine, Lauren and her People's Summit Everything Community Center have donated and delivered organic produce from Southern California farms to South Central LA. I am super excited to have her joining us today as well. So much about her work that we're excited to hear about. So Lauren, the floor is yours.
Hi, how's it going?
Great, thank you.
Cool. You guys are doing the presentation, right?
Yeah,
Give me 1 second. It's a really big file, so hold on.
Oh, okay. Cool. I'll chill.
Okay, I think that it's loading, or maybe it's taking a little while to load. So it's on the way and it'll be starting, but so it's up to you. We can just wait, and we can
Can I
also
just jump in?
start. Yeah, you can jump in.
Okay, cool. All right, well, yeah, let me know. I guess I'll see when it shows up. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm Lauren Halsey. I'm an artist based out of South Central LA, born and raised, still here. A lot of my art practice is about archiving neighborhood ephemera across various eras of South Central and remixing that material and that visual information back into new forms, fantastical structures, blueprints, maps, collages, sculptures, hopefully soon public monuments in my neighborhood. As an extension of my art practice, last year I started leasing a space a couple doors down from my current studio space with the intention of it being a neighborhood community center, community space. Originally, I was thinking about it in a very fluid but traditional sort of function of a community center, and that it would provide recreational, educational, creative support for children, teenagers, young adults at a very high level, free, no cost, and that the title of it is Summit Everything Community Center. And so Summit Everything just means that as far as like programmatically that it would shape shift or should shape shift with whatever the needs, desires, goals of the community has, whatever in the moment, in a sort of plural context where we can approach all these things at the same time. But when Corona hit and I realized that I couldn't have like a super spreader community center and I couldn't have folks in the space, though it was ready and meant to be open last fall, I started pivoting and thinking of ways I can engage the mission and the poetics and just thesis around the community center outside of the actual building. And I landed on a food program. So yeah, in response to coronavirus, since last March, I sort of appropriated this space to be this produce warehouse / assembly line hub to distribute these organic produce boxes to folks in South Central and Watts with friends, childhood friends from middle school, high school, college, my little cousins, my girlfriend, my studio assistants, their friends. And so, I mean, it was truly a collaborative effort and it still is. I don't do any of it alone. It's impossible. We've been doing it consistently since March. And it was super important to me that the aid that we were facilitating was sort of happening at our pace and was this self-directed freestyle. So in the first week was horrible. Yeah, no idea what we were doing. We were doing it off the strength of love and neighborhood pride and, you know, Googling how to do a assembly line, how to keep food cool, you know, all these things. But by the third or fourth week, we had our system down and we're distributing 600 very abundant, huge boxes per week, every Friday. And that was just like, that was the thing, that was the rotation. It was also super important to me that we weren't, as a community center, providing folks the crumbs, you know, or whatever, what was left behind, and that I wasn't replicating the produce that I see in my neighborhood that I just have huge problems with as far as quality, and that I made it like the mission of the food program. If it wasn't going to do anything else, it was at the minimum going to provide produce like at a very high level as far as it being like, because organic can mean anything these days, but like nutrient dense, grown from local family farms that we can touch and see as far as quality. So with the help of Karina Matthias, this amazing woman that I went to middle and high school with, and Samantha Rogers, this really cool woman that I met back in April, I was able to source just the best quality of produce that I could find in Los Angeles and San Diego County. And, you know, right now the food program is becoming, you know, there's now a food ethos with the community center. And while we're doing this and we're weekly, you know, distributing produce, which is so important, and like that's what the goal, that's what the program is right now. The ultimate goal is to sort of fix the sick system of the produce supply chain that buyers in grocery stores, where they sort of curate what the public you know, eats as our nourishment. And the goal is to, with all of these new relationships that I've sustained over almost the past year with like these wonderful farmers and family farms in LA, that I'll foster new relationships with buyers and farmers to bring a higher quality produce to the neighborhood. So yeah, so in a box, they change depending on what's in season and things like that. But in a box, I wrote a little list. You could find like mixed lettuce, Fuji apples, rainbow carrots, green beans, cucumbers, peaches, plums, avocado, tangerine, a melon, grapefruits, at one point a dozen eggs, corn, broccoli, mixed cherry tomatoes, curly kale, Tuscan kale, red beets, Swiss chard, green onions, summer squash, raspberries, strawberries, okra, radish, potatoes, shishito peppers, and yellow onions. So yeah, so that's what we've been doing. We've done some like really amazing, cool neighborhood partnerships and collaborations. We collaborated, and I hope this continues because it was just so amazing, with Patrice and the Crenshaw Dairy Mart, and they were building themselves at the Crenshaw Dairy Mart and providing us to distribute alongside the produce boxes, these like really wonderful, dense art kits for children that spanned across media, from drawing to watercolor and sewing and, you know, things like that. Also collaborated with the Sisters of Watts and the East Side Riders. And when they worked for about 12 to 14 weeks, when they were distributing hot meals per car, you know, we were doing the produce box. We did a really cool distribution on Crenshaw with the LA Black Worker Center. Lady and Larder collaborated with us for all of 2020, almost, providing us with about 10 to 50 produce boxes every week from Wiser Farms, who I was sourcing potatoes and melons from. And Hug is our newest collaboration, and they provide us with hygiene kits to pass out also. So for 2021, because the cost is, for two reasons, the cost is so expensive to sustain the produce boxes every week. It's like $20,000 minimum. I thought it's more important to sustain the program, but also to think about folks that don't have the privilege of just using a produce box, because it implies that you have this space and refrigeration, access to fire to do something with like Swiss chard. And with some of the Fridays, I was noticing that folks were going through the boxes and picking what they can keep on their bodies. So like the berries, the mango, the, you know, whatever. And so this, so far for 2021, we've been staggering produce boxes with hot meals commissioned by local chefs and caterers in the neighborhood, where we also provide the organic produce for the meals that they cook. So the first week was Hugh Augustine out of Leimert Park. You did like Hugh's hot bowls, the jerk jackfruit with plantains and rice and peas, and a kale salad. And then we did the produce boxes. And then last week it was Shanita out of Castles Catering, also out of Leimert Park. And she did these really wonderful meals that were like 200 of them were beef, 200 chicken, 200 fish, 200 tofu with like an organic veggie medley thing. And then this upcoming Friday, not tomorrow, we're doing produce boxes tomorrow, but upcoming Friday, collaborating with Stored out of Who's Hungry, who has this amazing kitchen off of like above Crenshaw and Jefferson, and does really wonderful jerk portobello mushroom and chicken and da-da-da. So that's where we are now. That's the spiel. Yeah, so now we're doing food, but what's really wonderful is that when the world open back up, the food ethos, like I said, will forever be a part of the community center in the form of building our own community garden in the space that will also function as like a sculpture garden and a beauty garden where children and, you know, folks can rest and pause from just like the mess of the outside world. But it will definitely be this garden portion where, for as long as the community center exists, we'll be able to grow and harvest our own organic produce to forever like recycle it back and redistribute it back to the neighborhood. We won't be able to do 600 boxes forever, but at the minimum, you know, 100 to 200 a week. And so that's where I am now.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lauren, for taking us on that journey. The chat is like blowing up with love for this and for you and for these collaborations. And I'm so sorry. Our team is saying they had trouble loading. We're still going to try on the off chance that they can get the slides. But thank you so much for sharing. And we got to be closer to you because you got to just speak from the heart. Although I love the images of not only the produce and some of everything, but the Black iconography really in your artwork as well. So we'll get to hear more about it in a minute. And thank you so much. And again, sorry for the technical piece. Okay, I'm going to bring into this conversation our third artist that we're also honored to bring forward, and that is Luis Rodriguez. And from 2014 to 2016, you might know that Luis served as the official Poet Laureate of Los Angeles. For Luis, poetry is soul talk, a prophetic act, a powerful means to enlarge one's presence in the world. And he is a novelist, a memoirist, short story and children's book author, essayist, a community and urban peace activist, a mentor, a healer, a youth and arts advocate. He is the founding editor of Tia Chucha Press and a co-founder of Tia Chucha Centro Cultural here in LA County. And so please join me in welcoming Luis. Thank you so much for being here to share a bit about your work and the connections between arts and advocacy. I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you so much. I think to understand my art and community work, I'm just going to tell my story. And we have some slides with this. So the important thing about my story is that it has to start with ancestors. And so what this first image is my mother at she think she was 8 or 9 years old, with her grandmother, my great grandmother Manuela, and her sister Chila. They're Tarahumara natives from Chihuahua, Mexico. And my mother's the one holding the doll. This is a very important, they're actually called Raramuri. They're very important people. And it starts with them because I go back to these roots that are deep in this country. And my grandmother and my great grandmother, Manuela here, and my grandmother Anna were starving in the Sierra Tarahumara, in the tribal traditional lands, and ended up during the Mexican Revolution in Chihuahua City. And they never got a chance to return back. So my mom was born there in that city. Next slide. Okay. This is my sister, Seni. She's 20 years older than me. She's holding me in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, where we lived. And the important thing about that is that the Raramuri have been residing in this area for at least 10,000 years. the desert covers Chihuahua City, some parts of Sonora, but also El Paso and parts of New Mexico. In other words, when my mom had me born there, she went across the US-Mexican border. She wasn't entering another country. She was going from our land to our land, regardless of the border, regardless of all that. But still, all my life, I've been called an immigrant. I don't consider myself an immigrant. I've been called a stranger, an alien, and a wetback. When I was 2, my family moved to Los Angeles. First to Watts, then at around 8 years old to South San Gabriel and the San Gabriel Valley. You should know about the San Gabriel Valley is that there were 100 Mexican migrant communities in the valley, existed since the 1930s to work in the orange groves and walnut fields. By the time we moved there, the groves and fields were gone. Nonetheless, South San Gabriel had dirt roads, no sidewalks, goats and chickens in backyards, surrounded by well-off white suburbs, races and class barriers everywhere. This barrio was also known as Las Lomas, the hills. At 11, I joined a gang. By 12, I started doing drugs, including heroin, which I did for 7 years. I became homeless. At 13, I began getting arrested, eventually for disturbing the peace, attempted murder, assaulting police officers. In 1970, when I was 16, I was put in murder's row of the Harlem Justice Jail during the Chicano moratorium against the Vietnam War. I ended up in a cell next to Charles Manson. Deputies threatened 5 of us with the deaths of 3 people, including the beloved journalist, Chicano journalist Ruben Salazar. After several days and nights, they released us with no charges. This was the start of my politicization. Here is a 1969 photo of me among homies in Lomas. I lost 25 homies and friends due to gang violence, overdoses, police killings, who ended up killing 4 of my friends, and suicides. Once revolutionary consciousness and social justice entered my life, I began living la vida loca. By age 20, when I had my first son, Ramiro, my daughter, Andrea, followed 2 years later, I gave up gangs, drugs, and crime. I worked in a paper mill, in construction, a lead foundry, a steel mill, and a refinery. But America's deindustrialization hit big in the 70s and 80s. The steel mill I worked in closed in 1981. I helped out at the Steelworkers Union Hall, which had the largest food pantry in the country. Bruce Springsteen did concerts in devastated industrial communities during his 1984 Born in USA tour. He helped fund our programs. Here is Bruce with my kids, Ramiro and Andrea. In the early 80s, I became a journalist. I worked for weekly newspapers in East LA and a daily newspaper in Inland Empire. I was a crime and disaster reporter, where I saw more dead bodies than any human being should ever see. I also freelanced, covering indigenous and campesino uprisings in Mexico, as well as the Contra War in Nicaragua and Honduras, where I got bombed twice and shot at with 50 caliber bullets. In addition, I worked for AFSCME in the largest union representation battle in the United States. In 1985, I moved to Chicago to edit and write for a left publication. Trini Cardenas edited its Spanish language sister publication. In 2 months, we became a couple. I also worked as a reporter writer for WMAQ All News Radio, which was owned variously by CNN, Westinghouse, and NBC. Eventually, Trini and I married in 1988. Here's Trini interviewing the late Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano in the early 1990s. Trini and I had 2 sons, Ruben and Luis. I'm holding them in this photo from 1994. Unfortunately, my oldest son, Ramiro, who had moved to Chicago and lived with us, had joined a Humboldt Park street gang at 15. He got kicked out of 3 schools, arrested, and even did a 3-month stint at a psychiatric treatment hospital. At 17, he began his first prison term. At 21, Ramiro got sentenced to 28 years for 3 counts of attempted murder, including against 2 police officers. Ramiro also had 3 children beginning at 17. Meanwhile, I became active in the Chicago poetry, the slam poetry scene, also creating Tia Chucha Press in 1989. And I continued the work I've done since 1980. Poetry readings, talks, healing circles, and creative writing workshops in prisons, jails, and juvenile lockups. Also now including homeless shelters, migrant camps, Native American reservations. And I worked on urban peace efforts, founding organizations like Youth Struggling for Survival, Increase the Peace Network, and the Humboldt Park Teen Reach. In 1993, Simon & Schuster released my memoir, Always Running La Vida Loca, Gang Days in LA. I quit all my jobs to spend 3 months traveling to 30 cities promoting this book. I was on Good Morning America, the Oprah Winfrey Show, National Public Radio, and more. I was featured in The Face magazine, Entertainment Weekly, New York Times, and other publications. The book became one of the most 100 censored books in the country. That year, I finally sobered up after 7 years of heavy drugs and 20 years of heavy drinking on top of that. I also took part in the first slam poetry tour of Europe. And I did a journalism trip to El Salvador and Los Angeles to cover the Salvadoran refugee gang MS-13, eventually ending up in Guatemala and Honduras. Because of my prison work in the US, I did the same in Mexico, Central America, South America, England, and Italy. Other books appeared of poetry, a novel, a short story collection, and children's books. The sequel to Always Running came out in 2011, entitled It Calls You Back, an odyssey through love, addiction, revolutions, and healing. Another book documenting my work was 2001's Heart and Hands, Creating Community in Violent Times. In the year 2000, Trini and I returned to Los Angeles, to the Northeast San Fernando Valley. A year later, Trini and I created Tia Chucha Centro Cultural and Bookstore, which is a very important transformative arts center and literacy and just amazing creative place. Over the years, we held classes in art, music, writing, theater, and Mexica, Aztec dance, and cosmology. We've had weekly open mics, an annual outdoor literacy and arts festival called Celebrating Words, a youth empowerment program called Young Warriors, and an arts-based program for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated called From Trauma to Transformation. We have the only bookstore and art gallery for 500,000 people in the Northeast Valley. Tia Chucha Press continues to publish books. Even with the pandemic, we've thrived with virtual events. In 2020, we were selected as a California Nonprofit of the Year. In 2010, Ramiro paroled from prison after 13 and a half years. He now lives in San Fernando with Trini, me, and our 2 other sons. He's doing well, clean and sober, gang-free and crime-free. My daughter Andrea lives in Chicago. We now have 5 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. More than 25 years ago, Trini and I returned to our indigenous roots. I returned to my ancestors. In 1998, a Dene elder and his wife spiritually adopted Trini. For years, we traveled to the Navajo Nation for ceremonies. In this photo, Trini and I are being honored during the All Nations Powwow in Los Angeles. We also have an indigenous-based podcast called The Hummingbird Cricket Hour. In 2014, I ran for California governor. And as you know, from 2014 to 2016, I served as LA's official poet laureate. Last year, I released my latest book, From Our Land to Our Land, Essays, Journeys, and Imaginings from a Native Chicanx writer. This story, as well as the depth and breadth of my community work, is how I developed the regenerative philosophies and formations of Tia Chuchas and beyond. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. Yeah, that was, I can't put words to it because you did it all. Thank you so much. That was incredible, Luis. Can't wait to hear the rest of this conversation today. So honored to have you with us. And there's lots of love for you in the chat too. So I'm thrilled that I get to now bring up the person who's going to help lead that conversation and really support a conversation among these incredible heroes, builders, artists, and colleagues among us. Alberto Rotana leads A Local Treasure, Community Coalition, or COCO to its friends, has been a leader in restorative justice work and recently published the People First platform, a policy agenda informed by more than 4,000 adults and youth to equitably move resources to highest need communities. Also to reimagine our criminal justice system and transform the built environment in South LA. He also built Community Coalition's cultural arm, including Power Fest, South LA's premier political concert, the People Power Convention, an annual convening engaging residents through plenary sessions, and Reimagine Justice, a living art exhibit marking the 25th anniversary of the 1992 LA uprising. In 2018, Community Coalition was selected by the city of LA to organize the Embrace LA inaugural dinner series. I attended one of those, thank you so much, and mobilized over 1,200 Angelinos to discuss race and equity. So please join me in welcoming Alberto. Thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you for having me, and what an amazing, inspiring, and emotionally driven conversation we've just heard from three amazing individuals from our backyard. You can take the slides down. Don't worry, I'm not going to take a lot of time, so you could go ahead and not worry about sharing that. It's okay. We heard enough. There's no need to take it back a notch from what we've heard. So before the conversation, I thought I would say just a few words about Community Coalition and our thinking about arts before really coming back to the artists. We believe, there's a quote by Diego Rivera that says, "It is said that the revolution doesn't need art, but that art needs revolution." That is not true. Revolution needs revolutionary art. And I love that because it takes away the distinction between both, and it really roots art in something much larger than self-serving individual storytelling, but towards something greater that's going to really dramatically improve the world we live in, the lives we live in, our families. We believe that art is a necessary ingredient in building and sustaining social movement. Throughout history, America's most powerful social movements have integrated art into its overall strategy, whether it's song in the civil rights movement, or theater in the farm workers movement, or photography to bring attention to poverty in the South. In the 60s, or most recently, which we'll talk more about, the art that has been utilized in the most recent movement and uprising that we've been experiencing and witnessing at recent day. South Los Angeles, where in South Central, where I've been grounded in over the last 2 decades, has a history of producing musicians, visual artists, actors, writers that use art as a medium to communicate the daily struggles and aspirations of African Americans and Latinos. To this end, social justice efforts ought to build and integrate art with activism and social change. We believe that an effective cultural strategy grounded in the values of social, racial, economic, gender justice, and the stories of everyday people help to communicate stories that inspire folks to take action on their own behalf. And in this way, art becomes instigative. Art is a trigger into social justice, not into isolation. It becomes an on-ramp and a steady space for volunteerism in social change. Different than data or political rhetoric, art is a universal language that everyone can relate to. We saw it in all three of the presentations done earlier. Art breaks down complex ideas and speaks to a wide range of people's emotions, from anger to hope to sadness to pain. It has the potential to touch those who would otherwise might not be involved in the social movement or might stay involved in the very counterproductive acts against our own community. We are very much engaged in a strategy to help advance that kind of artistic practice. We believe that a robust cultural strategy can be a way for mass participation, to catalyze new ideas, captures people's hearts and minds in ways that only art coupled with activism can. Organizing is our body politic, art is our heart politic. And together they can really do the beautiful work that we've been witnessing over the last year. Art, though, is often isolated from the struggles of inequality that impacts the quality of life of our people. Our efforts is really to help bridge that gap and on-ramp and instigate really the belief that anything is possible, that change is possible, that radical thinking, that reimagination is possible. The three presenters today have laid out amazing, groundbreaking work that's rooted in the history of art and activism led by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, particularly for this panel, Indigenous, Brown, and Black art. It's beautiful and amazing and an honor to have you all with us. This is a very difficult thing to do considering this was so amazing and so rich, so I'm gonna do my very best, but we'll open it up for you all to just roll with where you can. But I am gonna start with our esteemed elder on the panel. Your story, Luis, is incredibly powerful to me as a brown man to see you talk about your description of your life. And one of the things that impacted me about your story is that as much as we lift you and hold you in such high regard, your life had a lot of ups and downs, and you're still here with us today. And what I would love to ask you is to tell us a little bit about the anchor. What is the anchor that has been able to get you through so that we can continue to experience the art that you've created and to be inspired to be involved and to tell your story and be where you are today?
So I will have to say that I was very fortunate when I was a very troubled young man, because if you had known me then, you wouldn't recognize me now. I was a suicidal, homicidal. I was very sick in my soul, a heroin addict in the street. I got mentored. Somebody cared for me. Somebody that shouldn't have cared for me, who wouldn't give up on me. And what I tell people is, because people in the prisons, when I go in the prisons, they always say, how did you get scared straight? And I say, I wasn't scared straight. I was scared straight. Somebody cared. And now I see that as the way we can deal with anybody. Patrice brought in about the mental issues. I have many of that in my family, from bipolar to all kinds of issues. I think all of them can be healed if we have strong community, strong resources, and an imagination for it. I think this is where we're at. We don't seem to have the imagination for the encompassing way that we can embrace everybody. And I think that's what we're fighting for and struggling for. It's not just a political struggle, it's a struggle for everything. The imagination is being closed in, and you can tell from all the politics of the world we're dealing with. They're all closing in, and now they're starting to get to the point they're starting to kill each other practically. They have killed each other. So the point is, how do we imagine our way out of this, but also with implementation, the feminine and masculine energies combined? And I don't mean that in a binary sense. I mean it in the sense of how fluid it is. We need to bring that together. And I think that's what the Etuches is. It's the imagination and implementation put together, feminine and masculine in the proper relationship.
Thank you, Patrice. You talk a lot. I mean, one of the pieces that you presented on, you mentioned, I think it was at the Broad, you mentioned longing, and that to me is very much connected, I think, and I might be wrong, so I'll let you sort of get into it, this notion of imagination and dreaming. And I know that one writer that you and others at the Strategy Center introduced to me was Robin Kelly, and he talks about freedom dreams. And so could you talk a little bit about longing, art, imagination, and how you've been able to manifest that, and what role art can play, artists can play in that as we talk about art and advocacy?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I'm a big, when I developed one of my first performance artworks, Stained, an intimate portrayal of state violence, I specifically would ask the audience right before they witness the piece to take their time to imagine a time when there were no cages. We didn't cage human beings, a time when we didn't rely on handcuffs and sirens and courtrooms. Because the first place for me in our imagination, the first thing that's stolen from us is our imagination, our inability to imagine beyond what currently exists. And I think art specifically has the ability to help us imagine what is beyond, help us imagine what's possible, help us imagine what we are often told we're not allowed to do, not able to do, not trusted to do. I think it's art that has allowed for Black people in particular to survive here in America for 400 years. And so I think that, you know, art creates portals, art can create portals, art can create a world within worlds. And I know that in my childhood, growing up in the Valley, growing up poor, working class in the Valley, it was art. It was my imagination. It was being able to imagine something different, not just for me personally, but my entire neighborhood, my entire community.
I saw in the chat you mentioned you used to go to Teachuchas. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I grew up reading all your work, Luis, and we've obviously have met several times. Tia Chuchas gave me an award last year. And Tia Chuchas was one of the first places in the Valley. I was so excited when you all started Tia Chuchas, because I was like, the Valley never has coffee shops in the hood that we could go to. I always had to take the bus for 2.5 hours to Leimert Park to go to like a cool coffee shop and listen to, you know, poetry. And so when Tia Chuchas came around, like all of the Valley kids, all the Black and Brown Valley kids would go up there and do our poetry, our very bad poetry. And and so, yeah, just so grateful for spaces like Tia Chuchas that helped me imagine. The Crenshaw Dairy Mart is definitely a space that comes from the foundation of Tia Chuchas, and I wouldn't have imagined a space like CDM if it wasn't for the Tia Chuchas. So thank you, Luis, for everything that you continue to do for us.
Lauren, forgive me if I really do get this wrong, so you can check me on it. But it as I heard you talking about, it just seemed like place was such a significant part. It's such a significant part of your practice, and community in South Central in particular. And that touched me because as I've been doing this work, and I'm not from South Central, I'm an import, and I've been raised by South Central, but I'm not from here. But as I heard you, and I remember going to, when we could, I went to the Science Center, and there's this big map at the Science Center of the city of LA, like a topographical map. And you have all of these neighborhoods that's identified, but the one neighborhood is a big donut in the middle, and it's basically South Central, and there's nothing, no name of it, nothing describing us. You go on any tourist map, we're absent, we're invisible, kind of like Pacoima is invisible, right? We're just sort of like non-existent, but yet we're probably the most important neighborhoods in LA. And so I don't know, I would love to hear a little bit about if that's true, how that's true, why that's important to you, and how you're able to integrate art in place, and how that helps to instigate sort of advocacy and change we're seeking to accomplish.
Yeah, so just as far as like a little bit of biography, my maternal and paternal sides of my family arrived in South Central via the Great Migration, paternal 1920s, maternal 1940s, have been in the same areas of downtown South Central and the east side of South Central, basically Watts, mile west of Watts since then. And so with that just came, you know, downloading for a lifetime, so much neighborhood pride, aesthetics, poetics, story, material, just all of like this beauty. And no matter what I would have become, whether it would have been a basketball player, which I thought would happen for me, or an accountant, there would have been this like deep love and respect from where I'm from, and just living a life of a record of service as far as putting out tangible output, you know, out of care and love for this place. And so now with like a studio in my neighborhood, I don't see that any different. And I always say it, but I don't bifurcate whatever happens in my studio, whatever happens in my art practice from being of service in my neighborhood. In fact, the motive behind my engagement, deep engagement with the commercial art world, is to bring back the resources, information, funds, success of the work back to the neighborhood. And so the community center is the first iteration. In 5 years, I plan on exercising for the first time for myself the community land trust model, and really considering collective ownership with a group of folks in South Central, where we're able to together through the vehicle of art, think about living, think about our nourishment as far as like architecture and what I want to live in, what we want to build, not what's imposed on us, which is usually just like racist architecture in the environment. But food that we sustain, that's of our nourishment and sustainability, that's also not like in these systems that are completely racist and meant to destroy our bodies, that are like anti-health. Our own leisure, our own beauty, So I see art as a vehicle for all the ways I want to energize and create space, literally through sculpture and architecture, but soulfully through what happens in these spaces.
Thank you. That was my son. He came to, there's this book called New Kid by Jerry Craft. Oh, did I interrupt you? Sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. And so he's like, "Can I get the book back?" And it's a powerful book, and he loves it because he looks like me, and it's about a kid from New York, probably one of the hoods in New York, who's going to a private school with white kids, and the struggles that it has for him, his father, and just the daily racism he encounters. And it's just written in a way that he's 9, but he came to take the book back. So I got to, because I wanted to show, I was supposed to do a portrayal of me, but I was like, well, it's more like my son. But so he'll come back and get it. Something that all 3 of you have talked about is, or all of you have described your art in a way that's rooted. Here you go. You have it. Rooted in community. And it just seems to be so important. And you kind of already touched on it a little bit, Lauren. Maybe you can touch on it a little bit more. I'll invite all 3 of you to speak on this, because we have a bunch of folks watching in, and I feel like sometimes artists go and produce things in a bubble, separate from people, from community. And so, but all of your art seems to be very different, seems to be very rooted, guided by, driven by community. So I just want to invite you all to talk a little bit about that and why that's important. To not just do art in isolation, but art in relationship too. Any one of you could start.
I guess for me, because I'm interested in, or my practice, I haven't done it yet because it costs a lot of money, so I'm not there yet. But my skill has an architectural vision and architectural thinking, and I just have no interest in doing that alone. I have no interest in authoring formally through representation as well, that work alone, and working with my friends, working with my little cousins, my grandma, my family, just everyone opens up the work and extends the gaze and the lens of South Central from, in one work, a 7-year-old or 5-year-old to a 76-year-old who have ownership over the narrative, have ownership over the form, have ownership over, visioning how it should exist. And that's the way that I want to make work. I think it would be a disservice. I mean, I'm not the spokesperson for downtown South Central. So I invite, folks from the area or ties to the area to collaborate on the work with me. Because it's more meaningful that way. And I found it's a lot less intense, it's loose, it's fluid when I have a rapper friend who is building a sculpture with me, a hustler friend who's doing this, It just opens up the lens on like what, the world thinks an artist can be, that you don't have to go to these schools, you don't have to, you just are, so.
Luis, it looked like you were leaning in a little earlier.
Add that, to me, I learned this from the Chicano movement in the 60s. Art was integral to everything. It was never separated. I was a graffiti artist doing cholo graffiti, which was very intricate. It wasn't tagging. And somebody told me, "Why don't you learn to paint murals?" And he gave me, again, one of these mentors gave me a book of Mexican murals from, Rivera, Siqueiros, Orozco, Frida Kahlo's in there. And then at the band of the book was all these Mayan temples with murals in and out. And he was saying, it's in your blood, it's in your DNA. Art is who you are. And I painted when I was 17 years old, still on drugs, still in the gang. I painted like maybe 10 murals with 13 gang kids. And I got paid. It was an amazing thing. This is the movement that happened where art was happening, and even poetry. I started doing poetry because I would go to cafes and street corners and people doing poetry. People didn't know, for example, on Skid Row, there was a poetry collective, the Coalition of Homeless Writers. I was working with them in Skid Row. We would go to the Main Street bars and just start doing open mics. People don't know a lot of these things, and poetry, especially out of the Watts workshops, because I knew about all that and some of the stuff coming out of East LA. Manasar Gamboa, people don't know who he was. In the 80s, was a great teacher of poetry and art. He was one of my mentors when I was, trying to get into writing. So I just have to say it's integral to the movements that I know I'm aware of. And this is why at the Achuchas, it's integral to everything we do. We do a lot of things for community, but art is at the heart of what we do.
Patrice, would love to hear your thoughts on the importance of rooting our work in community.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably the only one of the few countries that this is even a question to ask. Unfortunately, this culture has really been obsessed with the individual, and it really gets highlighted in the art world specifically. And so I think that, our practice, from Lauren to Luis, to myself, like our practice may seem like, oh, like, tell us more about the community. I'm like, that's just what I do. I don't know how to do anything else. Like the minute I think about a project, I'm like, oh, like, okay, this person would be really dope. Like I'm constantly thinking about the collective. That is how my brain works. I actually think that's how the human brain works. And we get rewired to solely focus on the individual. We get rewired under capitalism, under a capitalist structure, to believe that the individual is the one that's gonna set us free, that, it's gonna be one person. And that's just not how we operate as mammals. There's no individual act. There's only collective act. And so I feel that way in my practice as well. It's a deeply collaborative practice. It has always been, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that that wasn't beaten out of me early on. I've been at the intersection of art and activism for a long time. And in a lot of my early years of activist spaces, people will be like, you got to choose art or activism. I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. Doesn't make sense to choose. Like these things exist in our movements. And, as Brother Luis said about the Chicano movement, there was side by side a Black arts movement, and a really powerful one in Los Angeles. And so I see my work as a part of that legacy of the Black arts movement, where it wasn't just art to make art. It was about building a new infrastructure inside the art world. It was around challenging the white art world in particular, and how it didn't believe in that our aesthetics was art. And so, I feel like for me and my work inside of this movement, it's been really challenging people to see art not just as something that gets placed in a gallery or museum, but see art for its fullness, and not wait for, a curator or a museum to say what is art. I think that is really unfortunate. It's a really unfortunate modality that we have lived in. And the last thing I'll say is I grew up with, a ton of artists around me. They didn't go to art school. They didn't get the privilege of getting getting signed by galleries. They didn't have that, but art was all around me. Both of my brothers are really amazing graffiti artists. That was like a big art practice that I witnessed, and it was criminalized. It was heavily criminalized. The first time my brothers were ever arrested was because of making art and putting it on walls, and the entire infrastructure of policing was about policing children. And taking this practice of wanting to be an artist that happened to be, illegal, and then criminalizing that. And so I think I've always sort of witnessed something different than what we're traditionally taught about art and how we practice it.
It's so, I guess I feel a lot of pride right now. I don't know enough about art out of New York and Chicago. I'm not connected enough. And I know that art everywhere is being democratized and challenging capitalist structures and white structures, male structures. But I just feel incredibly proud of the art that LA is doing in this way. And I just hope we keep doing it and pushing it, and that we can really be a model to because even the elite in their own way is democratizing it in some way with some of the projects. But more importantly, this kind of art that's democratizing it, that's creating it, that's reminding us what art really is, that we're all artists in some way, shape, or form, that can't be robbed from us, I think is a beautiful message and impact that all of you are contributing. So more on that. I'm going to ask you all to think about asking each other a question. If there's anything that you've heard someone else say that's really inspired you or moved you or had a thought about, I want to allow for that to happen, because what's sometimes most exciting is to hear you all talk to each other. But before that, so keep that in mind. If you can answer this question as we think about 2021, one of the pieces we want to ask you is what's ahead for you? What should we look forward to? What projects are you looking at working on? This has been a really crazy year, and I think that the project that you've been working on, Pray for LA, Patrice, really, I think Pray for LA was the hashtag, I might get it wrong, it speaks a lot to the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic has really hit LA as the epicenter, ground zero. So many of our folks, we're about to reopen again under intense political pressure by business interests. The vaccinations are not getting to the communities most in need. And there's questions about vaccinations in the first place. So the pandemic is hitting us, and the homicides and the violence. I mean, obviously the ongoing violence by police presence, and the very reality in South LA, there's been 2/3 of all the homicides that have happened this year have been centered in our communities. And the police are spinning it like, oh, it's our fault for pushing for defund, when we all know that's not true. And so as you think about, Lauren, your point around food, I mean, your project is really expressing what my mentors have talked about as food apartheid and the lack of access. I mean, all of these things are very real. So what's your plans for this year? It's a crazy year, and we need you all more than ever. And I'm just not just speaking to the three of you, but to everybody who's watching and participating in today's discussion. So I'll just open it up again to any one of you to start us off on this issue of 2021. Or Patrice, I'll invite you to start.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of metabolizing all the things you laid out, Alberto. I'm really interested in a couple things this year. It really disturbs me when like something really terrible is happening and it feels like the world isn't fully grasping the terror of it. I feel that way about COVID-19. It feels, I was not here when we were declared the epicenter, and when I came home, I felt like folks weren't taking it seriously. People were, we're hosting huge underground parties. And I was like, what is happening? Like, what's the disconnect here? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, it helps me in my own process when I'm feeling impacted, depressed, sad, traumatized. Like, I need to understand what's happening. And I feel like that oftentimes art helps me understand things. It really helps me process. So the Pray for LA is a processing space. It's not like an end product, an end thing. It's really, how do we process this collectively? What is happening, and the sheer level of sickness and death that's happening in Los Angeles that we haven't actually witnessed ever in this time, this level of sickness and death. And I think because we live in a country and in a place where we're not taught how to process our grief, we're not taught how to process really painful things. In fact, we're really taught to push them away, sweep them under a rug. I think that's partly why people, outside of the political, there's a whole bunch of political shit happening too around COVID, but I'm just talking around our personal inclination not to take this thing seriously. I think it has a lot to do with not being able to hold space for how traumatic this pandemic actually is and how traumatic it truly is. And so my belief is that we have to hold space for our trauma in order to get to a place of healing and resilience. And the way we do that is we're honest about what's happening. And so part of the work that I really want to do this year is be honest about this terrible thing that's happening right now. And that connects us here in this county in particular and across the globe. And my hope is that the Pray for LA project will get us closer to that. There's also 50 other million things I'm doing, because I'm always doing 50 other million things, but that's the thing that I'm most interested in. That's the question I'm trying to answer right now, and very much feel like there's just a ton of work to do. And I was talking to a good friend of mine who was a young person during the height of the HIV crisis, and how there was a very similar energy of like, people, but really like the government not really taking it seriously, and and really that seriousness not happening until white people started getting sick and dying. And with COVID, because there's so many Black and brown people being impacted by it, it's much easier, obviously because of racism and oppression, to not hold space, and the government not to hold space for this. So this is also, it's not just a personal responsibility conversation. This is clearly also a conversation about our government agencies. If Los Angeles County had an adequate healthcare system, we would not be in the situation that we are in today. That's the missing conversation in the media. It's the missing conversation in our own dialogue. We're not talking about the fact that the county has spent billions of dollars towards policing and incarcerating communities over supporting a healthcare infrastructure. So if a pandemic did come around, which these things happen to come around every 100 years, then we could deal with it. But instead, we're telling people to stay home. We're telling people to use their mask, sure, but we're not telling people, wow, we really fucked up. And I'm sorry that we did, and we're going to create a better healthcare system because of it. And that to me is the most important opportunity that we have right now as a county and as visionaries, is to hold our government accountable for the ways in which they put us in a predicament that would allow for Black and brown communities to be the most vulnerable in a pandemic. And that is, that is really disturbing to me. And I want that to be the center of the conversation.
Thank you, Patrice. I haven't felt this disposable in a long time. So commodified, so much just a part of the plan to get goods and services around this city at our expense of our lives, to not have the healthcare to support us, and to just see our family members and friends go in the way that we've been going in the neighborhoods that we've been, and you know, as we think about art, just for a moment, and Luis and Lauren, I'm invite you in on this. You don't have to speak to this, I'll speak to what you're, but we talk about art, and some of all of the nicest, most wealthy art are sitting in people's homes in the most privileged spaces, where we show up and we provide the food, we provide the cleaning, we provide everything. We fill up their jails, and it's disgusting. It's disgusting, and and it's painful. And I just hope that we all take this up, and I'm grateful to you for taking this up to remind us, because there is nothing else. And I believe like art can speak to that honesty. And so, Luis, Lauren, I invite you in on this conversation, 2021, wherever you want to go. Obviously, the pandemic. Luis, sounds like you're leaning in. Go ahead.
Well, let me just say that Tia Chuchas is making a big move. I know it's a hard time to make a move. We're actually going to take a while to get it all together. We hope that by the time, hopefully everything gets better by the end of this year, maybe sooner, maybe the beginning of next year, we'll be open. We're not going to open till we're safe. But the sad thing about it is that even though we've done everything to be safe, and I hope I got this right, I don't want to misrepresent this. I think 7 of our 9 staff have had COVID. Half of our board members got COVID. This community is devastated. This Northeast Valley, just like South Central, just like East LA, some of these communities, we're being devastated. Right now, I heard that Pacoima is the epicenter of the county for COVID. And so NBC came and interviewed me about it because they just couldn't believe how bad it was. So yes, I agree with everything that was said. Patrice is right. We are in a time where we have to look not just at where we're going, but what was the root of it? There's a root. There's a reason why we got so sick, and we don't have to be going that way. So Tia Chuchas is going to make a big move. We also started doing in Pacoima because of all the need. Every Thursday we were doing this thing called Breaking Bread to bring Black and Brown together through food. And there's other ways to do it. We're using food similar to Lauren. I really appreciate what Lauren was talking about. We're bringing food to one of the poorest communities in Pacoima, not too far from the housing projects there. And we're giving food free. And Tia Chuchas is part of it. It's part of a group called People in Action for Communities, different organizations. Tia Chuchas is the fiscal agency, and we're getting all this food. And I'm there, again, all safety protocols, you know, double masks and everything. And we're going to make sure people are safe and everything. But the people have needs. There's no food in these communities. The sad thing I have to add, though, is there is a violence uptake. I know the South Central is taking the heart of it in LA, but Pacoima picked up 2, and we just had a young man killed 2 weeks ago, 15-year-old. And there's problems, conflict between the Black and Brown community now in the housing projects there. And we want to do whatever we can to begin to deal with that. We can't just sit by, we can't just pretend that it happens, it's not a big deal. We're bringing in Black and Brown unity through justice. And that's the work that we're trying to do. I guess what everybody's doing. And so the only thing I would say is that, you know, crisis has a death and life in it. Something's trying to die so something new could be born. It doesn't mean people have to die. I'm saying something's trying to go. The way we run things in our country, the way we're organized has to die. The way we think about people and the individualism that people are talking about has to die. Something new has to come over, the collectivity, the embracing, the shared well-being of everyone. That to me should be the basis of our country. And that's not what's happening. So I think that's where it's going. Something's trying to be born. And we don't want to be tombs where we're just carrying dead things all the way around, all the dead things that we can't just get rid of. And we're corpse walking around as a society where all these corpses, literally and figuratively. But we also want to be a tomb for the new, for what's rising up and what's breaking through. So yeah, thank you.
Lauren, I invite you into space, please.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are all the restraints we know about because of Corona, but I look forward to, you know, creating COVID safe partitions in the outdoor area of the community center, which is about like 2,000 square feet, with engaging students with one-on-one learning in response to like just the very flat, out of context Zoom learning, Zoom school, and meeting children and teenagers with where they are and, you know, reading, math, poetry, art, and doing that, you know, one-on-one, bringing joy and excitement back to learning, you know. So there's that. I'm still just figuring out and taking a step at a time, a day by day, how I can try to subvert and penetrate the produce supply chain and foster and facilitate now these relationships, these year-long relationships with the farmers, and now bringing them to the buyers. And I'm starting with Superior, which is the neighborhood grocery store by me, and then the grocery store by my grandma's house. It's just like the ecosystem. And then, you know, trying to bring joy to folks and love to folks via art, whatever that means. But just taking it a day at a time.
You talked about public monuments earlier, and you know, that felt beautiful to me because we're in this moment where we're taking down these racist monuments that were built not back in the day; they were just built recently, and hopefully we're going to be putting up new kinds of monuments. And I don't know what you were referring to, but is there anything in the works around public monuments that you're working on that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, it was in the slideshow, but there was this project I did a couple of years ago called the Crenshaw District Hieroglyph Project Prototype Architect, long name, Prototype Architecture. And basically it was me remixing the function of the hieroglyph to describe contemporary Black and Brown folks in South Central, our narrative. Oh, it popped up. Okay, cool. Cool. And so,
oh, cool. There it is. Yay.
Yeah.
The one that was with the hammer. So cool.
About, you know, engraving into these panels, our own narratives, our own proposals for future. And I've been working on it for about 10 years, and I don't know if this will be the year, but some year it'll hit and it'll actually, you know, function as an architecture that the community that recognizes as theirs, because as with everything else, I'm collaborating with the neighborhood to build it, and we'll have like an open air studio where folks can come in and contribute to the archive, carve, draw, to describe, you know, its representation. So at one point it was meant to exist in the Crenshaw, what is it, Destination Crenshaw. So now I'm trying to figure out a new context for it. So.
Thank you. Do any of you have any questions or reactions to each other?
I had a question for Patrice. It just blows me away. You're so deep and dense in your work, and like you say, you do 50 million things, and it's like incredible. I do one or two things, and I'm drained, I'm depleted, and I just always wonder at your scale, which is just always so beautiful and strong and poetic, like how you pause and how you stay full spiritually, you know. And I know a lot of that has to do with team, but it's also like inner work or things you must do.
Thanks, Lauren. Oh man, I'm such a big fan of yours. You know that. I'm always telling Lauren, I love you. You're amazing. Oh my God. All your work, everything that you do, everything. It's just powerful. You know, I think I've spent a lot of time thinking about this question, like how to sustain. I think, you know, Alberto, you and I have talked about this a ton, because when there is so much crisis and so much need, it feels almost like selfish to be like, oh, I need to take my own time, my own space. And I battle with the guilt. I still take my own time and space, but I still battle with that. And I don't know if that's something that's ever going to go away, but in order to keep myself sustained, I really believe in accountability. Mm-hmm. And so whether that's like from my friends and family, like, okay, I said I'm going to get off of work at this time, or I said that I'm going to eat this kind of healthy food, or I said that I'm going to, you know, laugh with my kid, like that kind of accountability is really important. And you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to be vulnerable. And I think that I learned as a young person. I got really wise advice very early on, because I have always been this way, the way that I am. You know, some things people change and some things people don't, where I like my hands in a lot of different areas. It's just how I work. But I remember someone who organized me into my first civil rights organization said, listen, I love that you want to do 50 million things and you should continue to, but make sure that all of them feed you. Make sure that they all make you feel restored and whole. And so I always ask myself before I start a project or I'm connecting with an individual or the work that I do, like, is this, and I've gotten better over the years because, you know, you just get better in practice. Like, is this thing gonna feed my soul, my spirit? Is it gonna make me feel more human?
Sites are transitioning into vaccination sites.
Yeah. I love Zoom. We should just, to me, it's always like a really amazing performance project for me, the Zoom, like who unmutes and then you hear their child or some information. It would be really, we are recording it. It would be nice to just take those moments out. And that was such a COVID moment too, because it was talking about vaccinations. But yeah, that's how I sustain myself. It's like, I do have like a bit of a kind of a checklist. Like, I put in my calendar when to eat. I didn't do a good job last year at that, because I think the level of stress we were all under. So that end of the year, I was like, okay, you have to eat more, you have to sleep more. Like, and I literally calendar it. I need to, and I take my health very seriously, because I want to live long, and I want to live long and healthy, and I want to see my kids grow up, you know, my kid grow up, and I want to have grandchildren. I want to be able to experience the world from a healthy place. So I really do take my health very seriously.
We want to see you grow old and be with you.
Thank you.
This has been quite an emotional journey, this conversation for me, actually. It really has, from Luis, your story, to the reaction to the pandemic. Just thinking about the food supply chain, Lauren, I guess, I don't know, it hurts to know what we do have access to and what we don't, and that the primary mode, for a country this rich, to not have food for our people is at the heart of the contradiction of the healthcare system we talked about. So everything, the economic system we talked about. So all of you, thank you for this journey and for sharing your art. I want to turn the last 4 minutes over to each of you to share a parting thought, anything you want to share to our audience about today's conversation. Hopefully what we're doing is instigating action in everybody to root their work in community, but to do the work because we need it now more than ever. So I'm going to start with Lauren, go with Patrice, and then we'll close with Luis.
I'm just so inspired by all of you. You know, it's been a hell of a time, a really wild time. What I've noticed just being out, you know, on the streets every week, is that I see people, youth, my age, just the spectrum of people doing the work. I'm not saying it's not there, but I see that consistently, as opposed to like the bureaucracy that hasn't trickled down yet. And and I don't know that it will, but that inspires me and just keeps me moving, knowing that, you know, we have the endurance, we have the capability, we have the drive to show up for our communities and not only vision what we want for folks and for ourselves, but to actually implement and do it. And so it's energizing, you know. I can't wait for tomorrow, produce boxes.
Beautiful. Patrice?
I'm just humbled and grateful and for the vision behind this panel, and being able to be amongst some of my favorite artists and healers and visionaries. Luis, you transformed my life as a young person. I'm a direct result of your gifts. As someone from the San Fernando Valley and someone who grew up around a lot of gang violence and drug use, your story, your books, your vision shaped me, and I'm forever grateful for you. And obviously, Lauren, I'm a big fan of yours, always have been. Every time I can collaborate with you, I ask for that. And to the team of, you know, a couple hundred folks who showed up in the afternoon to Zoom with us, thank you for hanging out and envisioning. And Alberto, thank you for continuing the legacy of Coco and being such an important institution in South Central and never giving up on all of us.
Yes, again, I want to give thanks to all you all, but also, you know, LA County our arts culture, but also Patrice and Lauren. It's great to be in this panel with you all. And Patrice, being that we're Valley people, we know what it is out here. We know how it is. But I also happen to be a South Central person. And Lauren, I was in Watts, 109th and Mona, Camille and Santa Ana. I can tell you all the places I lived there in up to 8. And then I went back there to my 20s. My oldest kids are South Central kids. So it's just beautiful, the city. I think I want to say what an amazing, beautiful, amazing city Los Angeles is. And yet, as a valley, it's deeply troubled, like all cities. And I think, though, we have the capacity to change it. And that's what I want to build on. That's what I want to say. Let's do what we can to make it the city that we can imagine it could be, and then make it that way. I just want to end with one thing. My wife was in Mexico working with some indigenous elders just as the pandemic hit. So she had to cut her trip short because they were closing the border. And she made it just across before they closed. Otherwise, like a lot of my friends, they got stuck there in Mexico for a while. They didn't open it up for a while. She got back and she came back with a beautiful song. She sang it to me one morning, and I can't sing it, so I'm not going to sing it. But it had this beautiful words, and I just want to end you with this. The words were, "You are the weave and the weaver. You are the dream and the dreamer." And I want to leave those words with you all. We are the weave and the weaver. We are the dream and the dreamer.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you, all of you. Anything you ever need, any one of you from us or Coco, we're here for you. Thank you all for participating. Kristen, back to you. Much love.
Thank you. Oh man, much love to each of you. Not to mention the collective conversation. You were so feeding us, and we thank you. You'll see it happening in the chat. Everybody's putting in their thanks. Just incredible, incredible panel, incredible visionaries, incredible work, and incredible truth. And thank you for allowing us to be part of your day, part of your conversation, and taking time and space out of your work to help us be inspired, to help us learn, to help us share, to help us think, and to help us move things forward. I love that we can imagine something better and we can continue to build it. Thank you also to everybody who's been here today with us throughout. So appreciate that. We're going to shift into, you know, a lot of times I grew up in the performing arts. There's always like a talk back with the artists. And in this case, we're having a talk back with the attendees. So we are going to hold space for anybody who wants to actually have some conversations or reflection among the attendees. But thank you again. Just incredible conversation, incredible art, incredible work. So right now, I am going to ask our Director of Grants and Professional Development, and that's Angie Gaspar-Milanovic, to get ready to come on. And just Alberto, Patrice, Luis, Lauren, thank you so much. And thank you also to Alliance for Justice, Nan and Nona, and to our other funding partners. All right, Angie, over to you.
Thank you, Kristen, and echoing everybody's thoughts, which is a heartfelt thank you to everybody here and to what our guest artists and panelists have brought to us today. A lot of emotion right now, but words like nourishment, I'm thinking about future forward vision, how are we of service and collectively rooted in community in 2021 and beyond. This January has been intense, and I really feel like this program propels us forward in an incredibly positive way today. And we look forward to bringing you more opportunities to connect and to deepen our collective knowledge base, to share the creative innovations, and to feel focused and inspired in our work. And so just to give you a bit of a preview, coming soon, we are developing additional fora on racial equity, a session on public health and COVID-19, thinking about reopening protocols and arts organizations once that time is right and we get past this surge, as well as sessions on Americans with disabilities and mental health, trauma, healing, and community wellness. So there is a lot of programming moving forward this year, and we will keep you posted. So as we prepare for the final part of this program, we want to ask you, the attendees, to share links to your work in the chat, and we will share this back out in a follow-up email as a way for everyone to connect who is in this space today. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Laura Guerrero Nieto. She is our Senior Program Associate, and she has been with us throughout this event today, making sure that everything runs smoothly. And she's going to facilitate this next session. So please give her some love and props for all of her work in making today happen, along with all of the arts and culture team. So thank you, and Laura.
Thank you, Angie, and thank you to everyone for staying with us and participating in today's really inspiring day. This is a community effort, and so from our department, your Department of Arts and Culture, to you, we thank you for being here today.